797. The ferry was high above the ground and the wind was blowing. Even if it was not a celestial being, it was like a man in the clouds. Chen Pinggan laughed and teased Li Huai, "You've traveled so far to study and even traveled Jianghu with Pei Qian. Haven't you met a girl that you like?" What did it mean to like? It was probably a glimpse in a sea of bustling people that was hard to forget. Li Huai shook his head and said, "No, I'm ugly and I take after my father. As long as a girl is not blind, she won't like me. I don't lack self-awareness. Even if I want to be cheated of money and sex, I don't have the wealth and beauty. So there's one good thing. If a girl really likes me in the future, she must like me sincerely. So there's no need to rush. I'll wait patiently." In fact, Li Huai's appearance was not bad. He was a young man with thick eyebrows and big eyes. His appearance could be considered decent. Taoist Nun sighed and said, "Master, you're so humble that it's scary." Liu Kaicheng nodded and said, "When I first saw Master Li, I felt that he was like a dragon and a phoenix with a natural disposition." Madame Xianyang thought of Miu from Chunbansai and suddenly understood why she was not familiar with Chen Pinggan. It was because of this. Li Huai did not take Taoist Nun and Pavilion Master Liu's heartfelt words seriously. Scolding him was not serious and praising him was even lighter. Speaking of scolding, the real power was not in the books or on the mountain. It was the villagers in his hometown who were the best at scolding. Occasionally, one or two words could make people unable to raise their heads or straighten their backs for years. They had to choose a time when there were fewer people to carry water. Li Huai leaned on the railing and was lost in thought. It seemed that his life was always inexplicable and he was caught unprepared. He could only step on the watermelon rind and slide wherever he went. When he was young, he only thought that Mr. Chi was a strict teacher who imparted knowledge and was usually very easy to talk to. It was just that he was a little poor. Otherwise, how could he not even have a wife? Therefore, at that time, Li Huai had made up his mind at a young age to work in the fields with his parents. He could even go to the mountains to chop firewood and burn charcoal. He could even go to the dragon kill to be an apprentice. However, he could never become a teacher. This was not a job that could fill his stomach. Later, he found out that Mr. Chi was much more knowledgeable than he had imagined. He was the headmaster of the 72 Confucian academies, the direct disciple of the Sage of Literature, and the junior brother of the Dali imperial tutor, Kui Dong. Mr. Chi was a great scholar. The more he knew, the more amazing he became. After separating from Dong Shuijing and Shi Chuanjia, only he and Lin Shuyi chose to go on a long journey and catch up with Chen Pinggan and Li Baoping. The mountains and rivers looked good during the day, but at night, it was dark and scary. He changed his straw sandals one after another. His hands and feet were full of calluses. Li Huai had never told anyone that when he went out with Lin Shuyi and caught up with Chen Pinggan and Li Baoping, the sentence he said the most was to make Lin Shuyi swear over and over again that if one day he, Li Huai, changed his mind and wanted to go home, Lin Shuyi must go home with him. Later, they met Alliance, a sloppy man wearing a bamboo hat and leading a donkey. No matter how they looked at it, Zhu would casually punch him to the ground and make him roll around. Many times, Li Huai saw that Alliance's words were the same as Zhang Dafeng's. At first glance, he knew that Alliance was the kind of person who had a wooden box under his bed. Maybe it was filled with women's dresses and undergarments. Li Huai was worried that Alliance's mouth would accidentally offend Zhu. After all, Zhu came from Fulu Street and was very particular about things. That was why Li Huai always helped to smooth things over. He was young and spoke carelessly, so it was not good for Zhu to hit him. Alliance came mysteriously and left without a clue. Then, he met the big white goose on the side of the road. "Yulu, you're welcome." That "you're welcome" was very good looking, at least as good looking as his two sisters, Li Liu. At first glance, he knew that she was a girl who did not have to worry about marriage. Unfortunately, Lin Mu Tu still liked Li Liu wholeheartedly. Li Huai could not understand. Did his sister feed Lin Mu Tu a bewitching potion? When Kui Dongshan said that Chen Pinggan was his husband, Li Huai was confused. He always felt that these foreigners' brains were not clear. "Why don't you recognize your father?" Father and mother went to a faraway place and moved. Sister became a deity on Lion Peak. Father and mother opened a shop at the foot of the mountain. The business was good. They lived frugally and did not have any expenses. He heard that this time his mother returned to her hometown. In front of the neighbors, her voice was a lot stronger. She brought his brother-in-law back to her mother's house. Now, she dared to be picky. It was not that she disliked the cook's sister-in-law for not cooking enough oil. Otherwise, it was that the stewed dried bamboo shoots and duck was not chewy enough, and the fish had a slightly earthy taste. His best friend, Pei Qian, she seemed to have suddenly changed from a little charcoal to a big girl. Li Huai was still not sure which country's Princess Pei Qian was from. How did she fall into the common people? How did Chen Pinggan pick her up and bring her along? The world was in chaos. The world was at peace. Zheng Dafeng was no longer guarding the gate of Luo Po Mountain. Old Yang was no longer there. Sister was married. Chen Pinggan was a hidden official. The Great Wall of Sword Qi was taken in by the old blind man as a disciple. It could not be blocked or kicked away. Li Huai's arms and legs were thin. Who could he reason with? At that time, Chen Pinggan was not by his side. He never knew why. Anyway, when things came to it, he just muddled through. Otherwise, what else could he do? However, Li Huai felt that he was very lucky, so he kept reminding himself to cherish his fortune. Chen Pinggan said, "Knowing your own weight and not complaining when you encounter difficulties is called a normal heart. This is probably from your father. It's not obvious usually, but it's actually a very impressive thing." Li Huai was happy to hear that, but he still said, "Come on, I'm just a coward at home." In his impression, Chen Pinggan rarely scolded or praised people. On a street, the other Chen Pinggan also did not scold people. He just threw stones. On Ao2 Mountain, Liu Jubao and Yu Panshui, the two cultivators, naturally met here as their yin spirits. They had asked teacher Dong and Jing Sheng Yiping beforehand. They left their real bodies in the Confucian temple and left their bodies with their yin spirits. The Confucian temple allowed them to leave their bodies. Teacher Dong even joked that the Confucian temple did not dare to hinder the two gods of wealth from earning money. The number of divine coins Liu Jubao could earn in a day had always been a mystery in the world. For example, the Liu couple did not stay idle during this meeting. His wife went to the Baobao shop in the Parrot continent. Liu Jubao had secretly bought a mansion on the mountain at a high price. They were waiting for the meeting to end before announcing it to the public. After the Liu family took over Ao2 Mountain, the fruits and wine in each mansion improved significantly. Especially the 8 deities of water, they tasted very good. The Confucian temple was happy to see this. Other than the Wenjin ferry, the Confucian temple had already covered the cost of the other 3 temporary ferries. Liu Jubao already had a plan in mind. He would soon build the Ao2 6 sceneries on the mountain. There were 2 places to play chess. One was the Yangjiang Taigong's arena, and the other was the pavilion where the plaque was hung. Fu Jing, Lin Junbai, and Yu Qingqing could use it to promote themselves. As for Jiang Longxiang, he did not need to use it. Zhong Wenqian also had a poem wall. Dozens of people worked together to write poems and flowers. It was a gathering of sages. There was a painting of water and land by the ancestor of the painter. It was ochre red and green, and the colors were gorgeous. There were more than 500 people of different colors. Each of them had their own merits. In the future, whenever the immortal masters traveled or discussed matters in the Confucian temple, they would definitely stay at Ao2 Mountain. The young emperor, Yuan Ju, blushed. Good, good. Master Hidden Official is really strong. You used your sword energy to cast the body-fixing technique on that old thief Yunzhon. Lackey Yang, you're really good at picking up scraps. Damn it, you picked up an ascendant state cultivator. I'm so jealous of you. Why did you stop? Yunzhon, you little bastard, how dare you talk tough? Master Hidden Official, kill him with your sword. In the main hall, Liu Jubao and the others were quietly looking at the landscape painting. Each of them had their own thoughts. Only the young man was making noises. Yu Panshui couldn't stand the annoyance of this emperor. He said, "Your Majesty, Aren't you thirsty? Liu Suiyu smiled and said, I'm fine. I'm not annoyed at all. She had already kicked off her boots and was sitting cross-legged on the chair. She didn't wear any socks, revealing a pair of beautiful feet. Her toenails were painted red, which was very eye-catching. The emperor of the Xuanmi dynasty sitting opposite her was like a young storyteller. The key was that he was sincere, and it was very relaxing to listen to him. The young emperor imitated the Jianghu people in the books. He cupped his fists and said, Sister Liu, we hit it off at first sight. If you don't mind, we can become brother and sister. You're welcome to visit my house. Liu Suiyu smiled and said, that's easy. As long as the salary is enough, it's not a problem for me to have a son, let alone brother and sister. Yuan Ju immediately stopped talking. He had met a master, and he was no match for him. These Jianghu sisters didn't care about meat and vegetables. They were not comparable to those blockheads in the palace. Liu Jubao and Yu Panshui suddenly looked at each other. Someone rushed to Turtle Head Mountain like a rainbow. Pei Axiang was confused and said, why did Chen Pinggan come to Turtle Head Mountain? What did he want to do with so many people? Yuan Ju rolled his eyes and said, of course, he wants to beat up that Jiang Longxiang, who has a grudge with him. Normally, people in the officialdom don't care about the cold stove. This guy, on the other hand, was blinded by greed. Now, he has broken his old bones. It's a waste not to beat him up. After beating him up, he ran away. If I were Master Hidden Official, I would beat the shit out of Jiang Longxiang and feed him until he was full. Liu Jubao waved his sleeve and another landscape painting appeared. It was Turtle Head Mountain. Soon, a man in a green robe dragged Jiang Longxiang away. Yuan Ju patted the armrest of the chair and said, as expected of Master Hidden Official, he is full of surprises. Dragging a dog and traveling far away, his style is unparalleled. The young man turned his head and said, Grandpa Yu, I beg you, help me build a bridge and talk to Master Hidden Official. If he comes to our side and doesn't become an imperial tutor, he can start a sect. Our Xian Mi will provide money and manpower. Everything can be discussed. As long as he is willing to ask, Xian Mi will dare to agree. As an emperor, it's not a problem for me to go to his sect and be an honorary guest. When Master Hidden Official comes to the capital, I will ask the Ministry of Rights to make a good plan. We must leave a name in history. At that time, I will personally lead Master Hidden Official's horse into the palace. In the future, when he enters the palace with a sword, he will ride a horse and not be restricted by the palace. Liu Yuju said, count me in. I also want to be an honorary guest. The more he looked at the young emperor, the more he liked him. If he had the chance in the future, he must visit Xian Mi dynasty more. Yuan Ju said, Brother Liu, if you go to Xian Mi dynasty to do business in the future, no matter what you like, from the imperial court to other places, up and down the mountain, the friendship price will be 20%. Every mouthful of saliva is a nail. Today, I will leave my words here. Yu Panshui rubbed his forehead. How could he not have a headache when dealing with such a seemingly stupid but actually black-hearted little brat? Liu Jubao said with a smile, my business in Tongya continent is a little big. It's not suitable to be too close to Chen Pinggan and Luorpa Mountain. Your Xian Mi dynasty is no problem. Yu Panshui shook his head. He didn't think that Chen Pinggan and Xian Mi dynasty forming an alliance was necessarily a good thing. First, it was easy to attract the wind. Secondly, close proximity would cause resentment. Staying for a long time would make people cheap. These old words had to be listened to. The age of the old words was always older than the old people. Chen Pinggan, this young man, only acted like an embroidered tiger, but he was not a real embroidered tiger. Xian Mi dynasty's national power was thriving day by day. They didn't need anyone to send charcoal in snowy weather, let alone add flowers to brocade. Everything was stable and orderly. As long as they did things step by step, they could raise the dynasty's ranking within 100 years. If they could seize this opportunity to attack the wilderness, perhaps in a generation, they could make Xian Mi dynasty compete for the top 6. Yu Panshui began to nitpick, Tongya continent is such a mess. It looks like there is money everywhere and opportunities everywhere. But if Luopa Mountain's lower sect is located in Tongye continent, they might meet with the Liu family behind the scenes. Both sides will be red in the face. You are a fastidious person, but in recent years, the business people under your Liu family are mixed up with the good and the bad. They are very fierce in their desire to earn money, so they might not be fastidious. As long as there were many people in a family or a mountain, in many cases, doing things would be redundant. For example, they would be worried that they would fall into the awkward situation of not doing anything. In order to keep the glorious position under their buttocks and earn money, it was often easy for them to work too hard. Just like the people in charge of the Mountain and River Palace Bulletin, even if it was a clean office, they would often not be able to control the pen once they started writing. They would do things with good intentions. There were also those in charge of the Ancestral Hall and Ancestral Hall who had cold eyes and cold faces. They looked at people wrongly and were used to nitpicking. There were also those in charge of the money bags who would find trouble for no reason and make things difficult for the people in their mountain who were seeking money. The Liu family of the Pure Mountain continent had always handled these matters better than outsiders. Wealth was in one's life, not in one's body. When there was wealth, it was not in one's body. It sounded reasonable. But it was not entirely true. Without working hard to build a foundation, what was not a pavilion in the sky that could not withstand the wind and rain a few times? Hence, Liu Jubao cared more about the two words family style than anyone else. All the descendants of the Liu family had to climb up from the lowest position and rely on themselves to make a name for themselves. Often, they would change their surnames, go to the marketplace, go to the temple, go to the Jianghu. Each of them had many years of experience. In this process, the family would only secretly help them twice. When the Ancestral Hall confirmed that they were really talented, they would be able to return to the family. After that, there would still be layers of examinations waiting for them, one after another, and finally they would be able to take charge alone. As for the only son, Liu Yuju, did he need him to earn money? Of course not. When Liu Yuju went out, he could spend as much money as he wanted. For example, that inverted mountain, Yuan's were residents. Liu Jubao said, ambiguous matters, the vassal forces of the Liu family in the Tongyi continent, if there is a dispute in the future, can retreat a little. In short, don't be like the 9 true immortal school and get into trouble. There were actually many people in the Tongyi continent who were not particular about doing things. As time passed, they would only become more and more unscrupulous. The real person that the Liu family needed to deal with now was actually Wei Ying, who did not reveal herself during the meeting in the Confucian temple. A suzerain of the Jade sect who was willing to take the initiative to support the cultivators of the Tongyi sect was worth the Liu family's effort. Hence, the sword deity Xu Ming, who was in charge of the driving mountain crossing, would soon receive a letter personally written by Liu Jubao. As for Chen Pinggan and Luopa Mountain, the Liu family did not need to curry favor with them. As long as the other party's business was big enough and had more business connections, it was destined that they would not be able to avoid the Liu family of the Baijin continent who had already landed in the Tongyi continent. This was not Liu Jubao being arrogant and looking down on the young secluded official, but it was the truth. Yu Panshui asked telepathically, what do you think Zheng Juzhong and Chen Pinggan will talk about during the journey from the gate of the Panshui residence to the Wenjin crossing? Liu Jubao laughed. Why would I guess this? If I can't guess, it's harder than making a loss in business. Zheng Juzhong was too shrewd and intelligent. After all, he was someone who could win against Kui Dong in chess. Yu Panshui clicked his tongue. Listen, is this something a human would say? Liu Jubao hesitated for a moment and asked telepathically, if Zheng Juzhong is at the 14th level of Dao fusing, what do you think his Dao fusing will be? In the early years, Kui Dong talked to you a lot. Did he give you any hints? Yu Panshui grimaced, get lost, get lost. Don't mention this to me. You'll get into trouble. I didn't hear anything and I don't know anything. I don't even know who Zheng Juzhong is. Then, Yu Panshui smiled faintly and looked at the Baijin continent's god of wealth who only fought with money. What about you, Liu Jubao? Where will your Dao fusing be in the future? Reaching the 14th level of Dao fusing was a silent struggle on the mountain peak. Liu Jubao laughed, I don't know anything other than making money. Yu Panshui was convinced. Liu Jubao said for no reason, the Confucian temple's meeting this time is different. It won't tolerate those ignorant people. Apart from Nan Guangzhou, there were a few other ascendant realms who were not qualified to participate in the meeting. Even though the Confucian temple did not invite them, they did not dare to not come. For example, Jing Hao, whose Daoist name was Qinggong Taibao, was a cultivator from the Liuxia continent. There was also Feng Shuetao, whose Daoist name was Qing Mi. He was born in the Baijin continent, but he was a wild cultivator who disappeared all year round. Both of them were ascendant realms who liked to live in seclusion and were great cultivators at the peak of Haoran Mountain. Yu Panshui put his hand on his chin. If the Confucian temple is peaceful, the dogs in the village won't stop barking. Liu Yuju laughed. Yes, it's time to kick them. In the past, the Golden Boy and Jade Girl of the Divine Grandeur sect walked side by side. Unfortunately, the two of them were not a pair of mandarin ducks. It was just the man's wishful thinking. Jiao Jianfu looked at her and said softly, "Why do you have to do this?" Many years ago, he learned about something from the sect master. In the North Continent, He Xiaoyong had publicly announced that she already had a Daoist companion on the mountain. She was just waiting for him to nod his head. Jiao Jianfu felt even more miserable. He muttered, "Why do I have to do this?" He always felt that he was worse than Wei Jin of the Wind Snow Temple. When a woman he loved was right in front of him, yet she was so far away. This feeling was even worse than drinking water. He could not accept that the Daoist companion He Xiaoyong had chosen was the young man with straw sandals in the Lizhu cave heaven. No matter how much he thought about it, Jiao Jianfu could only remember that the young man was a skinny man with a slightly tanned face. He was poor, timid, and inconspicuous. He Xiaoyong turned her head and said softly with a smile, "Is it so hard to accept that your sweetheart has a sweetheart? I feel like the sky is not falling, and the path is still there." Jiao Jianfu looked sad. He nodded and said, "You can accept it, but I can't." He Xiaoyong shook her head and said, "Most of the time, you can't do it because you talk to yourself too much. Every time you ask yourself, you can't do it. That's why we have to cultivate our hearts." Jiao Jianfu said bitterly, "I'm not talking about the Tao with you." He Xiaoyong smiled and said, "If you don't talk about the Tao with me, what can you say?" Jiao Jianfu was extremely sad. The woman in front of him had always been like this. She always did things her own way, and her Tao heart was clear. But the more she was like this, the more others would miss her. He Xiaoyong reminded him, "If you don't care about her, your inner demons will make it impossible for you to enter the upper 5 realms for the rest of your life. This time, Qi Tianjun deliberately brought you with him. Don't you know what he wants? He hopes that after reuniting with me, you can cut off your feelings." Jiao Jianfu turned his head and looked at the river of the Mandarin duck Zhu. It was like the sorrowful wine in his heart. He hated that he could not drink it all. He Xiaoyong sighed in her heart and stopped persuading him. Jiao Jianfu looked at her for a long time and asked softly, "What's so good about him?" Some infatuated people only hoped that their beloved was out of reach. No man in the world was worthy of her, including himself. 7 emotions, 6 worlds, and 5 desires. People were rolling in the mortal world. He Xiaoyong said, "My great path is where the opportunity lies. It's not about whether he's good or not." What she meant was that even if he was good, he would still be her Tao companion. Jiao Jianfu murmured, "If I knew this, I would have died in the battlefield in the central region." He Xiaoyong did not know whether to laugh or cry. Jiao Jianfu looked at the subtle changes in the woman's expression and was stunned. Old Josie, who was walking behind them with Madame Gui, also tried to find something to talk about. He said, "The boorish peach pavilion lives up to his name. He's indeed a hero. An ascendant realm demon from the boorish world dared to subdue Nan Guangzhou in the Mandarin duck Zhu, which was an important place of the Confucian temple." Jiyu Qingsong was quite convinced. The only thing he was not convinced about was that Brother Peach Pavilion was an ascendant realm demon. Once his realm was high, it would be a little imperfect. He was not as good as Yu Pu, who had fallen from the immortal realm. Jiyu Qingsong glanced at the female immortal from the Qingliang sect. He heard that this junior martial sister had an unspeakable story with Chen Pingan. Old Josie was thinking about how to ask that little kid for advice. He should stop putting on airs as a senior. It's not likable. He was a person who knew what was important and what was urgent. He had always been recognized by the people on the mountain as someone who acted steadily and spoke appropriately. Chen Pingan, this little thief, really can't be judged by his appearance. Back then, even he had misjudged him and mistakenly thought that he was a hothead who didn't know anything about love. He didn't expect him to be a self-taught peerless master. When he missed the opportunity, he wrung his wrist and lamented. It was so regretful that his intestines turned green. Jiyu Qingsong was simply the most devout reader of the mountain and river travel book that appeared out of nowhere and abruptly stopped publication. He flipped through the book again and again and memorized it by heart. Many of the scenes where he met with various women and the subtleties of those conversations were circled by him one by one with a pen. It was a pity that after learning all kinds of martial arts, he couldn't even speak when he walked to Madame Gui's side. It was too different from what was written in the book and what was in his heart. What was written on paper was ultimately shallow. On one hand, Jiyu Qingsong felt that Chen Pingan's talent was extraordinary. On the other hand, he was sad that his aptitude was too low. He didn't even know to humbly ask for advice from Chen Pingan. Even if Chen Pingan was willing to teach him, he didn't know how much he could learn. He couldn't help but call out softly, "Madame Gui." Madame Gui turned a deaf ear to him. This immortal CHA only learned one skill from Lu Chen, which was sticky candy. Jiyu Qingsong said tentatively, "It's a good marriage for Jin Su and Sun Jiashu to be together." Madame Gui still didn't say anything. It was fine if it was an ordinary person. Why would she care about him? Jiyu Qingsong was a little proud. Since he didn't get scolded this time, did it mean that there was some progress? On the road by the river, two groups of people walked past each other. Jiyu Qingsong had a strange expression. Xu Xian and his friends were passing by. It was strange. Why did all of them insist on liking their junior sister, He Xiaoyong? Both parties didn't look at each other. They just treated it as strangers meeting. When they walked far away, Xu Xian turned back to look. He sneered at Jiao Jianfu, who was following beside He Xiaoyong. Lin Su was still talking about the previous exchange. She said, "His swordsmanship is brilliant. He has been hiding his strength. When facing an immortal, he could still hold back. He's not a match for me. If I'm a step slower, I'll always be behind him." Xu Xian said in annoyance, "Laugh if you want. That guy is the Daoist companion He Xiaoyong has set her heart on the mountain." This person had once met He Xiaoyong at the estuary west of Gbu in the North Continent. It was said that this man and woman had once climbed the high platform by the sea together to see the sky and the sea. After that, He Xiaoyong and Xu Xian fought in the territory of the Hualing dynasty. He Xiaoyong was very serious. Not only did she hurt Xu Xian, but she also killed two of Xu Xian's Jindan realm maids and directly took the two swords, cough beads, and Fu Yao. After that, He Xiaoyong casually threw them at the gate of the Qingliang sect and said that Xu Xian should get them himself. If he didn't have the courage and ability, he should ask his master, Bai Chang, for help. At that time, Xu Xian had the chance to kill the green-robed man who was traveling far away. Unfortunately, He Xiaoyong didn't give him the chance. At the entrance of the Love Pass, the lower 5 realms in the sect could easily laugh at the ascendant realm outside. Lin Su smiled and said, "If you didn't tell me, I really wouldn't know about this. I know that he and Liu Jinglong are friends." Lin Su was a typical mountain traveler. She lived alone and focused on Tao, not asking about the outside world. The matters of the world were the matters of the people in the world. The matters of cultivation were the matters of the people in the world. Venerable Fiery Dragon once commented that Lin Su was a Tao cultivator who didn't lack immortal qi. It was just that she wasn't popular and shouldn't have been born in the North Continent. She should have been reincarnated in the Snow Mountain continent. There were both praises and criticisms. It was both scolding and praising. However, to the cultivators of the North Continent, not to mention being praised by the old Venerable Fiery Dragon, it was an honor to be scolded half a sentence. As for the fact that venerable fiery dragon scolded the Snow Mountain continent, it was also a matter. This was called giving face to the Snow Mountain continent. In the past, among the 10 young people of the North Continent, Shu Xian was first, Lin Su was second, and Liu Jinglong of the Taihui sword sect was third. Because of He Xiaoliong, Shu Xian was severely injured. His originally smooth breakthrough to the upper 5 realms and become a sword immortal was greatly delayed. In the end, among the 10 young people who were newly released a few years ago, Shu Xian was still first. However, Liu Jinglong and Lin Su were no longer in the list. Lin Su was because of a drop in realm. The grudges on the mountain wouldn't be settled just because one side stood aloof from worldly affairs. However, Lin Su was very open-minded about it. Liu Jinglong, on the other hand, was not suitable to take over the position of the sect leader. In addition, he had entered the pure jade state. Li Cai, Dong Zhu, Bai Shong, and Liu Jinglong had accepted the 3 Q-sword challenges of the 3 sword immortals. Therefore, the entire North Continent recognized Liu Jinglong as a sword immortal. They wouldn't use him to bully the juniors who were still climbing the mountain. Lin Su said in his mind, "Take it easy. Don't give yourself a reason to talk about it. That young sword immortal will be at an advantage no matter who Q-sword challenges him." Shu Xian smiled and said, "The mountain path is long. There's no need to fight over who's better." Lin Su was a little confused. He felt that his good friend was implying something. However, he didn't want to get involved in the grudges on the mountain. On the island of the Mandarin Duck Shu, Yang Ji had already won the heart of the beauty. Tian Ni had also prepared a draft. He returned to his residence on Mount Ao and started writing. The incident at the Mandarin Duck Shu was worth writing about. They only had to wait for the Confucian temple to lift the ban. Only Celine was left. She found one of the 4 masters of the blessed land, the plum blossom god, Jade Face. In fact, the literati had given the plum blossom god too many titles. Let's not talk about the meeting at the Confucian temple. The sages of the Confucian temple, Su Zi, Liu Qi, Cao Group, all of them had written poems about plum blossoms. Every 100 years, she would change her name. It was similar to how the lady changed her makeup every day. For example, she used to like the guest. When Rui Feng received the name Feather Guest, she banished her to the cold palace and completely abandoned her. Other than that, she was more fond of Yenpa and Gluttonous Fairy. As for Bai Hua Kue and Yu Xiaoshun, their names were too big. The scholars dared to give them to her, but she didn't dare to use them. She only liked them in private and engraved them on the book collection seal and jade pendant. As for the courier, forget it. He was too old-fashioned. Celine smiled and asked, "Shall we take a look at the Yuping stone scripture?" She nodded in agreement. The plum blossom god was close to a few mountain lords. For example, Mount Joey, which was full of plum blossoms. The daffodil god, who was also the master of the blessed land, had a good relationship with the water lord of the 5 lakes. This was because they were close to the great Tao. There was once a swordsman who secretly strolled around the 100-blossom blessed land. He squatted on the wall of the courtyard and complained about how the East Lord didn't cherish her and how he was bullied by snow and frost. "Sister, don't worry. One day, even if I have to wear out my iron shoes, I will find Howren and help you get back at him." At first, she thought that he was a flirtatious lecher. Later on, she knew that she didn't misunderstand him. He was one. It was a pity that she didn't manage to meet that wanderer who liked to travel far and wide during the numerous drinking sessions at this gathering. When Yang Ji arrived at the mansion on Mount Ao2, Nan Guangzhao shook his clothes and suddenly woke up. The old man stood in the courtyard. His eyes were shining as he kept the immortal weapon-grade water robe. Just the repair alone would require a large amount of Guyu's money. What was more troublesome was not the money, but the refined river that Daoist Nun broke. At this moment, Nan Guangzhao didn't look injured at all. Yang Ji's heart palpitated. In fact, Nan Guangzhao was seriously injured. He just didn't want to talk to Yang Ji. Previously in the small world, Daoist Nun only gave him one choice. He could either pretend to be dead or be beaten to death. If he chose the former, He would have to remember to pretend for a while when he returned to Mandarin Duck Zhu. When Daoist Nun said these words, he had already revealed his true body. He grabbed the avatar's body with one claw and bit Nan Guangzhao's head. Although Yang Ji was surprised, he still said with a guilty face, "Immortal Master Nan, this junior did something unnecessary." Nan Guangzhao obviously knew what kind of person Yang Ji was, but this time in Mandarin Duck Zhu, not only did they lose their Dao, but they also lost their face. Having an immortal Yang Ji by his side made him feel better. Nan Guangzhao's expression became more amiable. "Thank you for your trouble." Yang Ji was flattered and cupped his fists. "I don't dare." Nan Guangzhao went straight to the point. "Pick 2 or 3 disciples of the Yang clan and send them to my mountain to cultivate. Damn it, if Yun Mu doesn't do anything after this, I'll go to his 9 true immortal pavilion." Yang Ji cupped his fists and lowered his head. "I don't dare to disturb Immortal Master Nan too much. In my clan, only Yang Ji has a decent aptitude. He's worthy of Immortal Master Nan's guidance when you're free. It's already this child's great fortune." In fact, Yang Ji thought highly of Yang Lu. That kid was a sword cultivator and had even gone to the Great Wall of Sword Qi to train. But Yang Ji wasn't a fool. How could he send a sword cultivator to Nan Guangzhao's doorstep? Therefore, Yang Ji benefited from it. Nan Guangzhao's eyes flickered. Back then, Yun Mu secretly deceived his master and killed his ancestor in Yun Bo's treacherous scheme. He told the public that his master was in seclusion and died. Yun Mu and his Dao partner, this pair of bastards, obtained a great fortune and thought that no one would know. Did they really think that he was a fool who couldn't see the changes in 9 true immortal pavilion? Yun Mu's master was famous for cherishing his life. As for immortal Yun Mu, he didn't directly return to his residence on Turtle Head Mountain. He landed at the lower reaches of the Mandarin Duck Zhu. He shook his sleeves and threw Li Qingzhu to the ground. Then, he waved his sleeves again and cast the bewildering barrier. Yun Mu remained silent. His eyes were cold as he looked at his once proud disciple. Li Qingzhu stood up in fear. He felt wronged. "Master, that sword cultivator is crazy." Yun Mu waved his sleeves and hit Li Qingzhu. Li Qingzhu's body spun and fell to the ground. Then, Yun Mu used the white jade Ganoderma to hit his forehead. Li Qingzhu lay on the ground and vomited a mouthful of blood. Yun Mu sneered. "What? You can't get anything good from me, so you want to complain to your master's wife?" Li Qingzhu said with a trembling voice, "I dare not. I dare not cause any more trouble for the sect." Yun Mu turned his head and looked at Turtle Head Mountain. He started to worry about that old bastard Nan Guangzhao. He looked kind, but he was just putting on a sanctimonious act. Otherwise, how could he be together with his master? They had been brothers for so many years. According to his master, he had joined forces with Nan Guangzhao to search for the ruins of the divine residence and secret realms in the early years. Nan Guangzhao did not do anything, but when he did, he was ruthless. Moreover, he did not leave any trouble behind. At that time, his master laughed and said that he would not have dared to travel with Nan Guangzhao if they were not in the same realm. Yun Mu retracted his gaze and scolded the disciple on the ground. "What a piece of trash. You can't even take down a golden core realm girl from the My Mountain sword sec. What about those tricks of yours? Haven't they always worked? How dare you say that as long as it's a woman, even if she's in the pure jade realm, she will be easily taken down by you? Do you think that the ancestral hall of the 9 true immortal gymnasium doesn't know about those bastards? Do you know that the Zhuolu Song clan's spies know everything? They have already recorded it and will attack the 9 true immortal gymnasium at any time?" Li Qingzhu raised the back of his hand and wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. He said softly, "Master, I still have some sense of propriety when I'm at the foot of the mountain. Those women will be dead set on me in the end. The Zhuolu Song clan can't take advantage of these small matters to attack the sect." Yun Mu sneered, "Relying on those lousy soul-shifting techniques? A few unorthodox talisman that can't even be seen in public? You're really capable. How dare you say that? If the 9 true immortal gymnasium didn't need this disciple to do something, would this kid really think that his master's wife favored him? The female sword cultivator from the My Mountain sword sect was called Shu Wei. She was the granddaughter of the current sect master and the last disciple of the My Mountain ancestor. She was extremely lucky. For some reason, Liu Ju, who didn't practice the sword but played chess on the banished Immortal Mountain, took a fancy to her cultivation foundation and made an exception to accept her as an unregistered disciple. With the combination of these three factors, Shu Wei was famous for being in high demand on the mountain. In other words, if Li Qingzhu could really become Taoist companions with Shu Wei, it wouldn't be as simple as a marriage between the two sects. Yun Mu had the means to carefully manage and support this disciple. Within 500 years, the My Mountain sword sect would change its surname to Li and quietly become a vassal of the Nine True Immortal Gymnasium. Yun Mu thought of something and sneered. Earlier, by the river, the girl in the Plum Blossom Nunnery was heartless. Fortune favors fools. When she saw Li Qingzhu's elegance, she fell in love with him. Now that he had become a drowned rat, she was greatly disappointed. Presumably, when they met again in the future, she would not stick to Li Qingzhu. Shu Wei, on the other hand, didn't have a good attitude towards Li Zhuqing before. Who would have thought that she would pity Li Zhuqing after falling into trouble? Was she dissatisfied with the green-robed sword immortal? Did she think that he was too domineering when he was a sword cultivator? The girl didn't know that it was that person who had indirectly saved her, this stupid girl, and saved the legacy of the My Mountain sword sect. Once the incident at the Mandarin Duckshu occurred, the Nine True Immortal Pavilion's secret plan would go down the drain, just like Li Qingzhu. Even if Shu Wei was stupid, the elders of the My Mountain sword sect were not. They would never let her form a contract with a cultivator who had become a laughingstock. Yun Mu finally sighed. The great Tao was unpredictable. The immortal's expression softened a little. Qingzhu, get up. Li Qingzhu stood up and bowed. She lowered her head and sobbed. I've caused trouble for Master. I can't redeem myself even if I die 100 times. Yun Mu stretched out the white jade Ganoderma and helped her up. Just treat it as a mental cultivation. By the way, let's talk as we walk. Tell me everything that happened before. Don't leave out anything. Li Qingzhu wiped her tears and began to recall the matter. She only said that she seemed to have been possessed and that she didn't think before she spoke. According to her temper in the past, she would never provoke the green-robed sword immortal again and again. Yun Mu was shocked. As expected, it was City Lord Zheng, whom she respected like a god. As expected, Liu Daochuan's sudden appearance was a smokescreen. When Yun Mu brought Li Qingzhu back to Aotu Mountain, she was shocked to learn about the Wenjin ferry. Yun Mu was speechless. The reverence in her heart couldn't be any greater. City Lord Zheng, who worshipped the First of Mercy, really deceived everyone in the world. If it wasn't Zheng Juzhong, who else could it be? Money came and went like water in Aotu Mountain. Many gorgeously dressed young fairies traveled the mountains and rivers. They also made friends with the young talents on the mountain, killing 3 birds with 1 stone. A mountain lord from a small country in Liuxia continent came painstakingly just to plead with the talisman to remove the floating talisman that was holding up the mountain. A middle-aged Daoist priest who claimed to be from the Jingwei Temple found a family in a city near the Confucian Temple. He said that the family's ancestor had taken a fancy to the family's child's foundation and that the child had an immortal fate. The child's parents didn't dare to casually hand over their only child. After confirming that the other party wasn't a swindler, they even dragged the good-tempered Daoist priest to find the Jingwei Temple. Then, they went to the county office to check the other party's customs and immortal residence records. Only then did they confirm that the other party wasn't a swindler. They learned that the Jingwei Temple, which had a grand name, was actually a Daoist immortal residence with the word sect. That muddle-headed child seemed to have 2 green snakes hanging from his nose. The Daoist priest was the disciple of the Central Plains talisman, Yu Xian. The Jingwei Temple was one of the 3 sects of the One Mountain. Some people copied a copy of the Jingwei Temple's Xian Ping stone scripture. Some found it troublesome to copy, so they bought a copy from the nearby shops. Those who were more active spent money to hire a scholar who earned money by copying books to help them make a stele. Compared to buying a copy, It was more meaningful. If these scholars, who were temporarily in dire straits, became sages of the Confucian temple or scholars of the academy in the future, they might be able to use them as their family heirlooms. In Panshui County, many Qi cultivators bought a lot of books. The price was ridiculously cheap. Even the immortals' money couldn't be used. How could it be considered spending money? They bought the books so that they could be more cultured. When they returned to their hometown, it would be easier for them to give them away. Moreover, who knew if these books had been touched by any sages or cultivators at the peak of the mountain? Everyone's trip to the Confucian temple was worth it. The young female cultivators were so excited that they felt like they were breaking through every day. Liu Qi was indeed unparalleled. With a willow branch hanging from his waist, he was the most exiled immortal in the world. Fu Jing, the little white emperor, lived up to his name. He didn't disappoint women and made them fall in love with him. As for Cao Ci, when she smiled, she was simply mesmerizing. The young Shu Bai was indeed ethereal. He was indeed worthy of the nickname Shu Xian. Because Shu Bai was guarding the arena at Ao2 Mountain, he was the easiest to find. Cao Ci and her friends also appeared at Ao2 Mountain. Fu Jing and Yu Qingqing played a game of chess. Of course, he let his pieces go. As the well-deserved master, Fu Jing gave 2 pieces to Yu Qingqing. He had an extraordinary aura, like an immortal sitting in seclusion. He had the charm of "I'm invincible except for my master." Liu Qi had once taken a night cruise in the Mandarin Duck Zhu. Therefore, some of the lucky ones did not hesitate to travel back and forth to meet 2 or 3 of them, or even all 4 of them. It was such a feast for the eyes that the women were about to eat until they were full of beauty. Some of the fairies started to imagine if there was such a sect in the world that could gather handsome men like Liu Qi, Fu Jing, and Cao Ci to activate the catoptric deflection. Wouldn't they go crazy? They could even put aside the matter of cultivation on the mountain. A young man who was fishing at Mandarin Duck Zhu with his friends put away his fishing rod and returned home. He was a scholar who specialized in helping people copy the shipping stone scriptures. In fact, he wasn't a Confucian disciple. However, he was good at writing small regular script. He had been earning money from this for a few years. He had already rented a shop in Panshui County and started to sell books. Unlike other foreigners, he didn't come here because of Zhong Tiexia and the other peak grandmasters who came here to fish. He usually liked to come here alone to fish. He didn't like to talk. Occasionally, when he smiled, he would be shy and sincere. For example, when he was bargaining with those traveling aristocratic families. This young man's real name was Liu Cai. He was a sword cultivator. 798. As the ferry approached the Parrot continent, Chen Pinggan turned to look at the young Taoist who was exchanging saliva with Liu Kai-cheng and asked, "I heard that you are familiar with Jinsui City?" Jinsui City's robe refining skills were superb and famous in the wilderness. Otherwise, Yang Ji's black dragon robe would not have been made with the unique secret technique of Jinsui City's waterway dividing yin and yang. The Sparrow Mansion relied on the Jinsui City robe that Chen Pinggan obtained and Miu gave it to them. They made a lot of money and helped the Sparrow Mansion, which was originally located in a corner, show signs of becoming one of the top immortal mansions in the North Continent. Just the Dali dynasty, through Wei Shanjun of the Cloud Mountain, made thousands of robes custom-made for the Sparrow Mansion. The robes were given by the Song clan to the gods of the mountains and rivers, the city god, and the Wanwu temple. This gave the female cultivators of the Sparrow Mansion the nickname of the Weaving Ladies. Anyway, sewing and refining robes was the cultivation of the Qi cultivators of the Sparrow Mansion. Luopa Mountain also made a lot of profits through the established revenue-sharing agreement with the Sparrow Mansion. Every 5 years, a large amount of Guyu money would fall into the bag and be recorded by Wei Wenlong and kept in the treasury. Every time Wu Jiong, the law master of the Sparrow Mansion, went to the Oxhorn Mountain ferry to deliver money, she walked on the ferry with trepidation. She was afraid of encountering the bandits of the upper 5 realms. After boarding the cross-continent ferry from the Sparrow Mansion to the Skeleton Beach, it was better. She was especially nervous because there was only one golden core sword cultivator, Umi, with her. Several times when he escorted her to the skeleton beach ferry, Wu Jiong would repeatedly ask, "Do you really not need the protection of the Sparrow Mansion? Anyway, your Luopa Mountain has a good relationship with the Sparrow Mansion. It's not too much to hire someone to go to the Sparrow Mansion and ask for security, right?" Miu said, "What's the point of wasting money? I'm here to squander the relationship between the Mountain Master and the Sparrow Mansion." Wu Jiong could not help but ask the man who looked like he was in the upper 5 realms but was only in the Golden Core realm, whose fault would it be if someone robbed the money on the way? Miu smiled and answered, "If the money is lost, it's on me." When a good-looking man talked big, even if people didn't like him, they couldn't hate him. Wu Jiong was helpless. The money belonged to Luopo Mountain. Luopo Mountain did not even care about it, so why should she worry? Fortunately, there were no accidents when she sent money to Luopo Mountain several times. After all, the Hemp Sect's Ferry and Dallas Northern Peak were all protective talismans. As for the Great Wall of Sword Chi, the middle 5 realms Mi Bongyi, the upper 5 realms Mi Shohua, and the stories of mountains and rivers that were far away in the horizon, the man in front of him was surnamed Yu and named Mi, and he came from Luopo Mountain. The two of them had nothing to do with each other. Chen Pinggan knew very well that the magic robe that had become the biggest treasure bowl of the Sparrow Manor and the biggest windfall of the Luopo Mountain was as good as the lowest grade armor of the School of Military Warfare's armor pills. It could be improved by another level. The way to do it was to seek the ancestors of the Jin Kui city in the desolate land and improve the craftsmanship. It was just that the cultivators of Jin Kui city had never gone to the Great Wall of Sword Chi. In the booklet that he asked someone to help him pass to the Dali dynasty, Chen Pinggan had reminded Dali that they must seize the magic robes produced by Jin Kui city on the battlefield. The more the better. They must dismantle more spells and restrictions. It would be best to capture a few cultivators of Jin Kui city, the higher the realm, the better. As if facing a great enemy, Taoist Nun hurriedly denied, "We're not familiar with each other. We haven't contacted each other for hundreds and thousands of years, how could we be familiar with each other?" The ceremony of all the female Jindan cultivators in Jin Kui city, even the celebration of the city lord becoming an immortal 300 years ago, that woman Yang Ji personally attended the ceremony. "Have you heard of doubting showing up to congratulate us? There's no such thing." Chen Pinggan nodded with a smile, "So that's how it is. The secret file of the Summer Palace didn't say so, but I probably read it wrong. I'll look through it again later to see if I misunderstood Senior." Taoist Nun had a sullen expression on his face as if he didn't eat hot shit. The heroic spirit he earned from the Ascendant Realm's Nan Guangzhou was returned to this black-hearted Taoist Nun. Taoist Nun quickly weighed the pros and cons in his heart and tentatively asked, "Do you have a grudge against Jin Kui city?" No cultivator from Jin Kui city has ever disturbed Howren. Chen Pinggan shook his head and said, "There's no grudge between us. Junior has always been fascinated by Jin Kui city's robe refinement. In fact, in the past, on the carriage at the Sword Chi Great Wall of the North, there was a group of female monster cultivators. Among them were the younger generation of the Great Monster official Ali and a female cultivator from Jin Kui city. Because of the robe she was wearing, she was very eye-catching." Taoist Nun suddenly said, "That's right. I heard that every time Taoist Nun went to the battlefield, he wore more clothes." Chen Pinggan hesitated for a moment and said in his mind, "If Senior can take out enough Jin Kui city's secret refining technique, I can give you half of the profit." Taoist Nun raised his hand and wiped his mouth. Master Taoist Nun really knows how to joke. I almost laughed my teeth out. Most importantly, only half of the profit. Do you think I'm a beggar? 50% is more like it. Chen Pinggan continued, "In the Confucian temple, other than refining a certain kind of military armor pills, they might also make 3 to 5 kinds of standard robes. Since they're still focusing on quantity, the quality doesn't need to be too high. It's similar to the clothing store at the Sword Chi Great Wall in the early years. There's a Sparrow Mansion in the Northern Reed continent. Taoist Nun, I know you don't lack money. However, money in the world is the most precious. I believe you know this better than I do. Besides, earning money in the Confucian temple is a small merit. Even if you don't want the merit, the Confucian Temple will still remember you. Of course, Taoist Nun didn't lack money. Since he was already at the peak of the ascendant state, he didn't lack cultivation. So, what did Taoist Nun lack now? Taoist Nun only lacked a sense of security in the world. At the end of the day, Taoist Nun was afraid that Taoist Nun would be disliked by the Confucian Temple as she was an outsider. She was afraid that the Confucian Temple would side with Taoist Nun for many things that could be wrong or right. In that case, the young secluded official was helping the young Daoist to pave a winding road for him to seek out incense. The more sincere one was, the easier it would be to pass the new year. Taoist Nun's expression turned serious. He said slowly in his mind, Jinsui City is a place that stands aloof from worldly affairs. I'm not talking nonsense. As for Castellan Yuanhu, she's a cultivator who doesn't like fighting. I'm not talking nonsense either. Otherwise, she wouldn't have given herself the Taoist name of Scribe Wu. The Summer Palace must have detailed records of this. So, Master Taoist Nun, is it possible? Taoist Nun's words were vague. Chen Pinggan understood. He smiled and said, I can't promise you anything now. Otherwise, you won't believe me. Even I feel that I'm not sincere enough. However, you've helped Jinsui City to find a way out. If something happens, Castellan Yuanhu will have to make her own choice. You're already very kind and considerate. Taoist Nun thought for a while and said, I'll have to talk to Li Huai's master later. This matter is too serious. I don't dare to make a decision on my own. Actually, there was no need to talk to him. Did the old blind man care about these trivial matters? However, Taoist Nun felt that she was being led by the nose by Taoist Nun during this conversation. She felt embarrassed. Chen Pinggan nodded and said, Senior, you're older. You're experienced and prudent in dealing with worldly affairs. Taoist Nun remembered something and asked cautiously, Master Taoist Nun, when I sneaked out of the 100,000 mountains to congratulate Yuanhu, how did the Summer Palace find out about it? I remember that I was very careful when I went out. You shouldn't have noticed my trace. Chen Pinggan smiled and said, I didn't write it down. I just made it up. In the secret records of the Summer Palace, it only wrote that Taoist Nun in the 100,000 mountains had a good relationship with Yuanhu in Jinsui City. Then there was the previous generation's hidden officer Xiao Chuo's comment, which was written in a crooked handwriting, Mistress, no doubt. Taoist Nun smiled awkwardly. Should he believe it or not? Both seemed to be bad. Chen Pinggan was silent for a moment and asked doubtfully, Senior, don't you have any doubts about the 5% profit? In fact, I really hope you can ask for 10%. Taoist Nun was about to speak, but Chen Pinggan said with a sincere expression, I didn't expect you to be so generous and open. You didn't mention it at all. Junior admires you. This kind of demeanor is rare. What else could Taoist Nun do? He could only stroke his beard and smile while cursing in his heart. However, after thinking about it, Taoist Nun felt that he didn't lose anything. Of course, the young man beside him would only earn more. Taoist Nun thought for a long time and said in his mind, doing business with a hidden officer is really refreshing. Chen Pinggan shook his head and smiled, I'm far inferior to you. Senior, you're not a businessman at all. That's why you can be so calm and composed. What he said was true. This time, Daoist Nun felt really refreshed. The ferry arranged by the Confucian Temple moved slowly and couldn't go fast. Along the way, a few ferries that left later for the Parrot continent arrived at the ferry port earlier. They were all private ferries on the mountain. However, when they passed by, they intentionally or unintentionally changed their route and chose to take a slight detour. Obviously, they were greatly traumatized by the extremely bad-tempered green shirt sword immortal and the even bad-tempered Daoist tender. No one wanted to be the next immortal Yun Zai or the ascendant state Nan Guangzhou. Who knew if they would get in the way of the other party's eyes and their own ferry would be attacked? Only the private ferry of Liuxia Island's Chou clan in Yuzhou approached. Chen Pinggan took the initiative to salute the ferry from afar. As a guest of the Chou clan, Lin Qing raised his hand and threw an item to the man in the green shirt on the opposite ferry. It was the newly carved landscape calligraphy seal. The old man smiled and said in his mind, "Welcome, sword immortal, to my blessed land." Chen Pinggan reached out and caught the seal. He cupped his hands again and smiled, "Of course. Other than asking Mr. Lin for advice on gold and stone, I'll be thick-skinned to ask for a few Yushuan restaurant seals. I'll also have to eat the best Yuzhou hot pot before I leave. I'll definitely have to pay for the seals. However, if the hot pot doesn't live up to its name and disappoints me, don't expect me to pay you a single copper coin. I might not even go to Yuzhou in the future." Lin Qing smiled, "That's not a problem." The two fairies then parted ways. Lin Qing told the Qiu brothers about the sword immortal wanting to eat hot pot. Qiu Shengong and Qiu Xuanji, the two talents of Yuzhou's Qiu clan, looked at each other and smiled. Qiu Shengong asked, "Mr. Lin, is this unknown sword immortal using Yuzhou's hot pot to get close to us, or is he really a glutton?" Lin Qing smiled, "Why would a sword immortal who doesn't even care about Yun need to get close to Yuzhou's Qiu clan? Don't forget that the backer of Zhouzhen Immortal Restaurant is Zhuolu Songzi, who's having a meeting in the Confucian Temple. Did you see him being courteous?" Qiu Xuanji smiled, "That's good. The old ancestor is right. Most of the foreigners who like our Yuzhou hot pot aren't bad. They're worth making friends with." Chen Pinggan sized up the old Tianhuang seal, which was of excellent workmanship and materials. It was extremely heavy in his hand. To the immortal teachers and scholars who liked this item, one tael of Tianhuang was equivalent to one tael of grain rain money. Moreover, it was priceless. Seal, west of the golden sky, disappearing in the daytime. Drunken immortals came from the moon cave. Flying swords like rainbows, kicking the south to open the earth veins. Overturning the Big Dipper, illuminating heaven's gate. Bottom line, once seen in green. Chen Pinggan fell in love at first sight. He immediately felt the seal in his hand become even heavier. The ferry stopped at the Parrot Islands port. There were already people waiting there. It was a group of young boys and girls. All of them had swords on their backs. They were the 18 swordmasters of the Elephant Sword Sect. After Chen Pinggan and the rest got off the ferry, one of the girls mustered up her courage and walked out of the group alone. She blocked the path. As the Elephant Sword Sect's guest elder, Madame Xianyang pretended not to know this girl who was extremely talented in swordsmanship. In the sect, she was the most daring. She was the one who spoke the most freely with her master, Qi Tingji. Lu Ji had high hopes for this girl. Chen Pinggan stopped in his tracks and asked, "You are?" The girl blushed slightly. "I'm a disciple of the Elephant Sword Sect. My name is Wu Manyang." Chen Pinggan nodded slightly, indicating that he understood. Then, he waited for her to continue. The girl's face instantly turned red. She was afraid that this hidden official of the Great Wall of Sword Qi, the Mr. Chen in her heart, would misunderstand her name. She hurriedly added, "It's Yang as in 100 flowers bloom." Yang as in beautiful and ugly. Chen Pinggan could only continue to nod. He could still recognize this word. As soon as she said it, she regretted it. The world's most embarrassing opening line, she did it. How could she forget the draft from before? How could she not remember a single word? Seeing that the girl did not speak and did not give way, Chen Pinggan smiled and asked, "Is there something you need from me?" The girl's forehead was dripping with sweat. She shook her head vigorously. No. She did not move a single step. In fact, it had only taken a few steps to reach this place, but it had already exhausted all of the girl's courage. Even though she kept telling herself to get out of the way and not delay the hidden official's work, she found that she could not move at all. The girl's mind went blank. She felt that her life was over. The hidden official would definitely think of her as someone who did not know the importance of things, did not know the slightest bit of etiquette, and was also ugly. She would just obediently stay in the sect and practice her swordsmanship. 10 years, 100 years, hiding in the mountains, and not going out. Her life, other than practicing her swordsmanship, was meaningless. Chen Pinggan did not have the slightest bit of impatience. He only smiled softly and said, "Practice your swordsmanship well." Wu Manyang finally came to her senses. The smile on her face was uglier than crying. She sniffled and moved aside to give way. She lowered her head and muttered, "Okay." Chen Pinggan was actually very embarrassed. He braced himself and said to the girl, "In the future, you can ask Mr. Lu more questions about your swordsmanship." Wu Manyang raised her head slightly. She still did not dare to look at the smiling face. She grunted in acknowledgement. Madame Ruoyon sighed faintly in her heart. What a silly girl. At this moment, the girl seemed to have flown over like a cloud. Her beautiful face was like the rosy clouds of the morning sun. Fortunately, a young man came to her rescue. He said telepathically to the young hidden official, "My name is He Chosheng. I will enter the upper 5 states in the future. I will have a sword fight with the hidden official." Chen Pinggan turned to look at the energetic young man with a sword on his back. He nodded with a smile and said, "Sure." It seemed that he had good luck with the younger generation. After the two groups of people separated, Wu Manyang wiped the sweat from her forehead and asked the young man, "What did you say to Mr. Chen just now?" He Chosheng said, "We agreed that when I reach the pure jade realm, we will have a sword fight." Wu Manyang was puzzled. "When you enter the upper 5 states, won't Mr. Chen be at the 14th state? Why fight? What sword fight?" The young man said sadly, Senior sister, just because I like you, you can't bully me like this." Wu Manyang shook her head. Her ponytail swayed slightly. She looked at the back of the green-robed figure. Suddenly, she felt that sword training on the mountain was very interesting. Before he reached the Parrot continent, Chen Pinggan stopped and turned his head. He looked into the distance. 2 sword auras dispersed, each going to a different place. One of the sword auras was the Parrot continent. Chen Pinggan was puzzled. Why did senior brother use his sword? Who was he fighting with? And it seemed like there were 2 of them. One was the Parrot continent, the other was the Pan Shui county. Chen Pinggan saw with his own eyes that the sword aura brought by the scabbard landed not far away. As for the ordinary cultivators, their realm was not high enough. They had already closed their eyes or turned their heads to avoid it. They did not dare to look at the sword aura. The Parrot continent itself didn't have many changes, but the river water around the island suddenly became shallow, causing the originally small Parrot continent to look like a receding river, with many mountain roots and earth veins exposed. All the cultivators who had just arrived from the Yuanyang Zhu complained incessantly. What was going on today? Were there fights everywhere? Daoist Nun patted his good friend's shoulder. "Fellow Daoist Liu, thanks to you. Wherever Pavilion Master Liu went, there was bound to be a disturbance." Liu Kaicheng smiled. "You're too kind." In a mansion in the Parrot continent, Ascendant Realm cultivator Feng Shuatao, whose Daoist name was Qing Mi, was discussing with several friends on the mountain. The so-called good friends were actually just like Nan Guangzhao's lackey Yang, who knew how to talk and was tactful. They discussed together on how to spread their influence in the Tongya continent. Other than the Yugue sect of the Yugue sect, which needed to be treated with respect, the Yugue sect was not worth mentioning. In the Pan Shui county, the great cultivator of the Liuxia continent, Jing Hao, the master of a sect whose Daoist name was Qinggong Taibao, was also in a similar situation. However, compared to Feng Shuatao, who was a wild cultivator, there were more than 20 people around him. He was sitting on the main seat, talking and laughing together. Previously, everyone disapproved of the sword cultivator who was the head of the 4 troublesome ghosts on the mountain. Some people said that this guy only dared to arm wrestle with Yunzhong. If he dared to come here, he would not even be able to enter the door. An unsheathed long sword broke the mountain restriction of the mansion and hung in the courtyard. The tip of the sword was pointed at the heroes on the mountain in the house. Jing Hao put down the wine cup in his hand and squinted at the long sword outside the house. It looked unfamiliar. Which unruly sword cultivator was it? Someone in the house stood up and cursed loudly. He came to the door and said, "Which blind fool dares to disturb Elder Jing's drinking mood?" A figure landed in the courtyard. He reached out and gently grasped the long sword. He said indifferently, "Zwa." The person at the door looked like he was being strangled. His face was pale and colorless, and he could not say a word. Zwa said, "I'm looking for Jing Hao. Those who have no business here may leave." Zwazwa glanced at the person at the door and said, "You can stay." The person was in a dilemma. He wanted to say to Zwazwa, "Don't be like this. Actually, I can leave. I'll be the first to leave." Everyone here had heard of Zwazwa's name even if they had never seen him before. The person outside the house was known as the person with the highest Howren sword art. He was recognized as the scholar with the worst temper in the Confucian school. Jing Hao stood up and twisted the wine cup in his hand. He said with a smile, "Mr. Zwe, since you and I didn't know each other before, you're not here to drink. However, I don't think you're here to practice sword with me, Jing Hao." Zwazwa said, "After practicing sword, it's up to you whether I drink or practice sword." He was too lazy to continue talking nonsense. Zwazwa took a step forward and waved his sword casually. He and this Qinggong Taibao, who was known as the master of the 80 great spells, made their first move. The person at the door and the people in the house all used their special escape techniques to escape from this troublesome place. There were all kinds of spells and abilities, and they were dazzling for a moment. Only the person at the door suddenly stopped at the top of the wall. Because the surroundings were like a cage, Sword Chi created a strict world. After Zwazwa made his move, he said to the person without turning his head, "Are you not going to apologize before you leave?" The person immediately cupped his fists and lowered his head, saying, "I was wrong." In an instant, the pure Jade Realm cultivator was wrapped in the Sword Chi cage and fell heavily on a roof a few hundred feet away from Panshui City. Fortunately, only his robe was torn. After the person got up, he still cupped his fists and thanked Zwazwa before leaving. Jing Hao threw the wine cup in his hand, and the cup suddenly transformed into a pocket-sized mountain. The wine in the cup turned into a long green river that surrounded the mountain like a belt. At the same time, a small world with mountains and rivers of 100 miles appeared between him and Zwazwa. As he raised his hand, the great Tao of the world in the sleeve appeared. However, they were all slashed apart by the sword. The sword Qi arrived in the blink of an eye after traveling 100 miles. Jing Hao stretched out two of his fingers and held an unusual green talisman. After dispersing the slender sword Qi, the priceless talisman in the Qinggong Taibao's hand was also scattered by the sword Qi and its spiritual energy was quickly burned to ashes. The small talisman was actually as bright as the galaxy. However, Zwazwa didn't know how much swordsmanship was used in this casual move of his. Zwazwa stepped over the door with his sword in hand and reminded, "Raise a world." Jing Hao had no choice but to perform several interlocking small worlds as if he was obeying orders. Moments later, the famous Grand Protector of the Azure Palace stood guard in his own world and unleashed all of his 80 great Daos. However, he only unleashed a single sword strike each time, either breaking through one or several of Thorn Wormwood's attacks. As for Jing Hao's endless spells, even if they were lucky enough to escape under the sword light, they couldn't get close to him at all. They would collapse by themselves if they got close to him. In the end, Zwazwa seemed to have told Zwazwa that fighting was not complicated at all. Just use one more sword. Zwazwa really only used one more sword. He walked out of the house with his sword and left with the wind. In the sky, he stopped an Ascendant Realm cultivator who ran away when he saw the situation was bad and asked, "Where are you going? Shall I give you a ride?" Feng Shuetao didn't stop. He became faster and faster and said loudly, "I don't dare to trouble you, Mr. Zwe." Zwazwa was running side by side with the real body of the cultivator whose Daoist name was Qing Mi. Zwazwa said, "Yes." 799. Feng Shuetao, who was born in the mountains and lakes, was more decisive than the Green Palace Grand Guardian of Panshui County. Seeing that Zwazwa didn't seem to show any mercy today, he immediately used his trump card to attack. The Ascendant Realm cultivator, whose Taoist name was Qing Mi, suddenly shone with golden light between his eyebrows, as if he had opened his heavenly eye. Vaguely, it was as if a gate had opened, revealing a small and exquisite imperial palace. Then, a young man in a boa robe and a white jade belt walked out from it. He had golden eyes and held two iron maces in his hands. Every time the two iron maces knocked against each other, a golden lightning would burst out. The lightning grew bigger and finally intertwined into a net, as if a thunder pool with infinite Taoist will had reappeared in the world. Every time Zwazwa sent out a sword, he would leave a clear and stable sword trajectory between heaven and earth, which was unshakable. Therefore, in the sky, there seemed to be more than a dozen silk threads suspended in the air. This was probably the most real way to cut through the sky. In fact, Feng Shuatao had already used several kinds of mysterious escape methods, but somehow, Zwazwa could always accurately find his real body and arrive at him with his sword in an instant. The young man in a boa robe and a white jade belt was Feng Shuatao's young spirit body, named Qing Mi. The thunder whip transformed from the iron maces could also search for Zwazwa on its own. Unfortunately, as soon as those thunder methods approached Zwazwa, they would end up with more thunder than rain. It was not that Qing Mi was an embroidered pillow, but this kind of offensive thunder method, which was as powerful as the heavens' tribulation, seemed normal when facing Zwazwa. If it were any other immortal, they would have been in a terrible fix. Chen Pinggan raised his head and squinted. When he looked carefully, he found that each thunder contained a long string of golden words, as if they were a complete secret book of the Thunder Sect. With just this slight movement, the lightning whip in the sky was like a divine general of thunder that had sensed the offense of a mortal teacher. It swiftly and fiercely smashed down, charging towards Chen Pinggan, who was near the Parrot Island ferry. Chen Pinggan lightly tapped the ground with the tip of his foot and instantly leaped several dozen feet above the ground. He stretched out a palm, his 5 fingers like hooks, and used his palm to block the golden thunderbolt. His other hand twisted his wrist, controlling the martial aura chi to prevent the true meaning of the thunderbolt from dispersing. Finally, he shook his sleeve, condensing the thunderbolt into a golden bead, and threw it into his sleeve. It was equivalent to receiving a remnant of the true thunder talisman. It wasn't very meaningful, but it was better than nothing. When he had free time, he would try to refine a few more words. Even ordinary Ascendant Realm Chi refinement warriors might not be able to withstand this lightning whip without damaging the Tao of Thunder Dharma at all, unless they were half-step heaven ascension great cultivators like the Grand Heavenly Master of Dragon Tiger Mountain and Venerable Fire Dragon. The slightest mistake in the celestial treasured book secretly passed down from the top of the mountain could lead to a huge error. 1 or 2 sentences or a few key words might lead the cultivator astray. Later on, the blind old Taoist, Jiao Cheng, became a consecrator of Luopa Mountain. Putting aside his hidden identity, he had injured his internal organs because he practiced an incomplete thunder dharma, which subsequently led to his blindness. The young Taoist was anxious. Obviously, after leaving the Great Wall of Sword Chi, his swordsmanship had improved again. This was the first time Li Huai met this senior Uncle Zwe, who he had only heard of but never met. Thinking of the shallow knowledge in his mind, Li Huai felt very guilty. He always felt that he would be scolded to death if he met this senior Uncle Zwe. Pei Qian had once told her that Uncle Master Zwe was very knowledgeable. Back then, she had traveled to the Great Wall of Sword Chi with the big white goose. She was lucky enough to meet Uncle Master Zwe, who was even more knowledgeable than swordsmanship. During that examination of knowledge, Uncle Master Zwe had asked so many questions that it shocked the heavens and the earth. It was only thanks to her rote memorization that she was able to pass the examination. One should know that Uncle Master Zwe had asked her dozens of difficult questions in one breath and she had only answered about 70 to 80% of them. Therefore, Li Huai's impression of this senior Uncle Zwe was that he liked to catch the juniors and ask them a lot of questions. The young Taoist was about to say something when Liu Kai-cheng spoke first and praised, "Senior Uncle Zwe, your swordsmanship is amazing." The young Taoist said, "Senior? Fellow Taoist Liu, you don't have to. According to your age, you are much older than me." Liu Kai-cheng sighed and said, "There is a seniority in learning the Tao, and there is a specialization in the field. I sincerely call Mr. Zwe a senior. It is my heartfelt words." Chen Pinggan reminded the young Taoist, "Senior." The young Taoist was confused. What? He was pretending to be stupid. He cursed in his mind, "Mother ***, your senior brother is attacking left and right. Why am I helping? Am I asking to be chopped?" On the Great Wall of Sword Chi, he would rather curse Alliance 100 times than look at left and right. This was a principle that even an idiot knew. Chen Pinggan had to explain patiently, "There is a pile of free incense on the ground. Senior, Are you too lazy to bend down? The young Taoist was enlightened and laughed. That makes sense. Many cultivators who came to the Parrot continent were not strong enough, but they were bold and didn't know what was good for them. They were used to the bustling scene on the mountain and didn't know the mysteries of the cultivators fighting on the mountain peak. Especially the thunder technique of Taoist Ching Mi, it was too strange. It was as if it had eyes and could generate lightning on its own, smashing anyone who tried to peek. As a result, dozens of lightning whips fell down. The young Taoist rose from the ground and hovered above the island of the Parrot continent. He waved his sleeves and shattered the golden lightning bolts one by one. Chen Pinggan reminded him again, "Senior, after saving people, remember to scold them. Don't be polite." The young Taoist lowered his head and scolded, "Little kids don't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Don't you want a pair of eyes?" The sounds of thanks around the Parrot continent were endless. Some of the Tao protectors who had failed to persuade the juniors did their best. The older cultivators were also able to protect the lives of the juniors around them. Of course, it was better for them to have someone help them, as it would save them a lot of cultivation and magic treasures. For a moment, everyone sighed endlessly. They never thought that this young Daoist who appeared out of nowhere, who acted so domineering and arrogant in the Mandarin Duckshu, was actually an otherworldly expert who cherished his juniors. Sure enough, one couldn't judge a book by its cover. Chen Pinggan reminded him again, "If someone invites you to be a guest, you can pick 2 or 3 people you like and tell them you'll see when you're free." The young Taoist smashed a golden lightning whip with his palm and said angrily, "Do I need you to teach me the ways of the world?" Chen Pinggan laughed and said, "I don't dare to teach you how to do things, but I can teach you how to behave." When getting along with this savage doubting, one couldn't be too obedient. The young Taoist glanced at the person who seemed far away but was close to him with a sword. He flew back to his original place resentfully. Liu Kaicheng asked softly, "Brother Doubting, how long do you think they'll fight for?" As for the outcome, there was no suspense. The young Taoist sneered, "If you're not at the peak of the Ascendant Realm, you won't be able to withstand a few swords. Just treat them as more than half of the 14th Realm sword cultivator." More than half of the 14th Realm didn't sound as good as an Ascendant Realm peak. But in fact, not to mention more than half of the 14th Realm, even half of the 14th Realm was a natural chasm compared to an Ascendant Realm cultivator. Because it meant that a peak great cultivator didn't have the qualifications to reach the heavens. Because his life was not in danger, Feng Shuatao glanced at the green shirt sword immortal on the Parrot continent. He didn't expect that Taoist Ching Mi's distraction would cause him to take another sword for no reason. The sword slashed horizontally and then vertically, causing the lightning pool to be halved again and again. Whether it was when he fought the Green Palace Grand Guardian in Panshui City or Feng Shuatao in the Sky Canopy, he still held back a lot. He only used the sword technique realm he had when he went to the sea to visit the Immortals and fought against the 2 Ascendant Realm Q-swords. He didn't even use his full strength. This was equivalent to pressuring the border again and again. First of all, the 2 Ascendant Realm cultivators had many scruples when they fought. They were too worried about being questioned by the Confucian Temple, so they didn't dare to use their full strength. Moreover, they didn't know the depth of the Ascendant Realm cultivator's foundation. They didn't want to accidentally kill the other party with just a few swords. But if it was on the sea, it was a different story. If they were careless, then so be it. In the end, some Ascendant Realm cultivators in the vast world, such as Nan Guangzhou and Jing Hao, were inferior to the Ascendant Realm demons in the desolate world in terms of fighting and killing. The Qi cultivators in the vast world mostly did it for the realm, to prove their Tao and immortality. The desolate world was purer. They wanted the realm, immortality, and immortality. But in the end, it was for the pleasure of killing on the great Tao. They both wanted to live as long as the heavens and the earth, but they were on 2 different cultivation paths. Feng Shuatao was indeed a wild cultivator. He said in his mind, "If the left sword celestial wants to kill, don't blame the area within a 1,000-mile radius for spreading spells and spells. When the time comes, innocent people will be implicated. Of course, I'll be the one to blame. But if they die, they can't blame me. They can only blame the left sword celestial for being overbearing. The left servant said, "You can try." Feng Shuitao was speechless. He was so angry that he almost suffered internal injuries. If it were someone else, Feng Shuitao would think that they were bluffing. However, the scholar in front of him who turned to sword practice could not be judged by common sense. Feng Shuitao asked, "Why do you want to fight with me? You need a reason to fight, right? I don't have any grudges with you and the sage of literature." The left servant said, "I don't like you. Does that count as a reason?" Feng Shuitao's face turned gloomy. "Why must I be involved in the battle? I've cultivated in peace on the mountain for thousands of years, and I've never disturbed Howren Mountain. Do you think you're the hierarch of the Confucian temple? Why do you care so much?" The left servant frowned and said, "I'll tell you one last thing. Only a stubborn person has the right to talk tough to me. These Ascendant Realm cultivators were not weak in cultivation, but they were good at finding excuses for themselves. Even if they couldn't imitate Zhu Shunji's skills, they could at least imitate Pan Huayin. Of course, they didn't want to suffer any losses. It would be fine if that was all, but when the world was peaceful, they would gloat. For example, there were several fierce battles in the south of the Liuxia continent. However, the Qinggong Taibao, whose hometown and sect were both in the Liuxia continent, never showed up. Zhu Shunji, the sword cultivator from the Central Plains, died in the mountain and water cave of the Fuyao continent. Feng Shuitao, who had a grudge with Zhu Shunji, went to the ruins to pay his respects. Even when they arrived at the Confucian temple, these peak cultivators who survived the tribulation of weapons still didn't know how to restrain themselves. When the sky was about to fall, it was fine to lower one's head and lower one's waist and drag out an ignoble existence. When the world was at peace, one could just close the door and secretly enjoy it. Don't push one's luck and pretend to be indomitable and upright, only to accidentally miss the war that swept the world. The left servant didn't talk much with Feng Shuitao, but every time he spoke, he would feel more annoyed. Therefore, the left servant decided to use his sword for the last time. At this moment, a figure suddenly stood up from the Confucian temple and shouted, "Let me do it." The left servant hesitated for a moment and didn't use his sword. He allowed that person to brush past him. He pressed Feng Shuitao's head, who had nowhere to hide, and they ascended and left Howren together. From the looks of it, they were going to the Great Wall of Sword Qi. The cultivators around the Confucian temple were all dumbfounded. The left servant sheathed his sword and returned to the Confucian temple. He didn't use his sword, and he didn't say anything unnecessary. He returned the text. At the entrance of the temple, the left servant sat on the steps. Lin Junbai was still sleeping, and the young celestial master, Zhao Yaoguang, was guarding her. Zhao Yaoguang hesitated for a long time before he mustered up his courage and said, "Mr. Zhuo, I'm Zhao Yaoguang. I have a favor to ask." The left servant said, "He won't agree." "Don't say anything." Zhao Yaoguang hesitated for a long time before he said obediently, "Okay, I understand." When he returned to the Celestial Master residence in the future, he would be able to answer to the elder at home. It wasn't that he was heartless, but the left sword immortal didn't even give him a chance to invite him. The left servant placed his sword on his knees and closed his eyes to rest. Back then, when he was practicing his sword skills at the Great Wall of Sword Qi, Chen Qingju once told the left servant in private, "If you can't kill an Ascendant Realm cultivator within 10 moves, what's the point of ascending to the 14th realm? It's meaningless." At the end, the eldest sword immortal patted the left servant's shoulders and said, "You're not young anymore, and your sword skills aren't good enough. I'm worried for you." At the door, the scholar Yiping said with a smile in his mind, "Mr. Zhuo used his sword twice, and it was lighter than expected." The left servant replied, "As long as the Confucian temple gives me a definite answer, I can use my sword more heavily." The scholar Yiping shook his head, speechless. On the Parrot Continent side, Daoist Nun said something fair. Compared to Nan Guangzhao, this guy with the Daoist name Qing Mi is indeed stronger. However, he's more thick-skinned. He's willing to stand still in front of everyone and take that dog's paw. Anyway, Alliance wasn't here, so he could scold him as much as he wanted. Liu Kaicheng said with a smile, Feng Shuatao is actually more than that. He's hiding a lot. Wild cultivators are all like that. Of course, it's mainly because Feng Shuatao doesn't dare to move. He had already provoked the left servant who would definitely ascend to the 14th realm. If Alliance, who had already experienced the glory of the 14th realm, came, no one in the world would dare to be so fearless. Chen Pingan said, "The great cultivator Qing Mi is more suitable for fighting on the battlefield." Daoist Nun ignored it. Those who were weaker than him in fighting were not worth his attention. However, Liu Kaicheng understood the meaning behind Chen Pingan's words. Feng Shuatao was more suitable than Nan Guangzhao to descend the mountain. Daoist Nun gave Chen Pingan a shiny jade tablet. It was engraved with the key secret techniques of Jinsui City's robes. It was written in tiny characters, and there were about 7,000 to 8,000 words. Daoist Nun said with a smile, "It's agreed. 10% of the profits." Chen Pingan did not care about Dao Ting's shameless act. He quickly browsed through it with his mind and made up his mind. According to the secret record, it was indeed possible to upgrade the robes of the Sparrow residents by 1 rank. Not to mention 10%, even 20% was not excessive. Chen Pingan said, "Every 60 years, Luorpa Mountain will pay according to the agreement. Other than the immortal money, there's also an account book." There was a big difference between paying every 60 years and paying every 10 or 30 years. Daoist Nun frowned and said, "Annoying, checking the accounts. Do you think I'm an abacus accountant? Do you not trust me, or do you think I don't trust you? If I don't trust you, why would I do business? If you don't trust me, you can walk your own path and I'll walk my own path." Chen Pingan smiled and said, "Friends have their own rules. Doing business has its own rules. Especially when friends do business together, there's no ambiguity. Senior cannot look at the account book, but Luorpa Mountain can't not give the account book. If you think this will hurt your relationship, then it means we're not suitable to earn money together." Daoist Nun said impatiently, "Whatever." The group went to the bundle house. It was a secret realm of mountains and rivers. It was similar to the Golden Millet wine shop in the inverted mountain. Along the way, many people looked at them and took the initiative to make way. An unreasonable green-shirt sword immortal, a young Daoist who almost killed Nan Guangzhao, and a famous White Emperor city's Liu Daochun. These 3 people indeed had a unique aura of "please come and provoke me." Chen Pingan always felt that his bundle house was not bad. Until today, when he entered this secret realm, he knew what real family background was and what cultivation was. He felt a little ashamed of himself. In fact, his own Oxhorn Mountain, together with the ferry and those shops, was actually the work of the bundle house. It allowed Cloud-Covering Mountain and Luorpa Mountain to benefit greatly. The bundle house was a loose sect. It was said that they did not have any serious golden jade records, nor did they have a mountain or an ancestral hall. The whereabouts of the founding ancestor was also uncertain. In any case, wherever the sect's cultivators went, business followed. As for how the Qi cultivators entered the bundle house and what the sect's regulations were, it was a mystery. It was only known that every time the founding ancestor of the bundle house appeared to do business, he would take out a Qi harmony house that he carried with him and open the door to welcome customers. There were a total of 99 rooms. Each room usually only sold 1 item. There were occasional exceptions. Chen Pingan and the group walked past the rooms one by one. Almost all of them would enter and take a look at the goods sold by the bundle house. There was the sea of brushes from the glittering jewel immortal abode. There was a painting of an immortal horse. Each of the 24 solar terms was taken and displayed in sequence. There were extremely few small summer coins in seal script. There was a big colorful bowl with the 5 grains bountiful into the treasure map. There were a few stone heads of strong men. Mountain ghosts and thunder gods spending money. A pair of large wooden boards with painted door gods. Qing Lu Blessed Land's landscape painting book. There was a small clay jar called the Descending Mountain Jar. It looked inconspicuous, but it was a mountain treasure that could suppress ghosts. There were also a few broken grotto heavens and blessed lands. As long as one had enough money, they could all be bought. If they had already sold the goods, the talisman beauty in the room would hang a small wooden sign outside the door. There were 4 words written on it: "Good karma has been formed." To be honest, if these were not treasures that the founding ancestor of the bundle house personally took a look at, there was no possibility of picking up a bargain. Chen Pinggan really wanted to sweep them clean. He only said that the jade bamboo fan that he saw in the room had an excerpt of Susie's prayer for rain post on one side of the fan. On the other side, he wrote dragon sting poem in cursive. At the end, he wrote grain of grain season, wind, rain, thunder, and lightning. The inscription was from Liu Ju of the banished immortal mountain. Chen Pinggan almost wanted to borrow money from Liu Kaicheng to buy this item. However, when he saw the price, he knew how difficult it was and retreated in the face of difficulties. There was no doubt that all the treasures in this bundle house were open to the public. However, the price was indeed too high. One could only hate that it was too difficult to earn money and that one's wallet was too thin. Chen Pinggan was not in a hurry to move. The delicate and pretty talisman beauty in the room seemed to have secretly received an edict from the founding ancestor of the bundle house. She suddenly bowed to the green-robed Sword Immortal. She smiled gracefully and said in a soft voice, "If Sword Immortal takes a fancy to this item, you can buy it on credit and take this fan away first. In the future, in any bundle house in the vast world, you can make up for it at any time. This is not an exception for Sword Immortal alone. Our bundle house has always had this rule, so Sword Immortal need not worry too much." The biggest feature of the bundle house was that the buyer could buy it on credit. No matter if it was an immortal master, a mountain cultivator, or a poor cultivator, they all had the opportunity to sign a contract with the bundle house. Then, they could take away the goods. It was much simpler than buying and selling houses at the foot of the mountain. Moreover, the contract was almost without any binding force. In other words, if the buyer could not pay the money, the bundle house would admit defeat and would not pursue the debt. Therefore, in the history of the vast world, there would often be cultivators who would appear every 100 years, or even 1,000 years, to pay the bundle house back the immortal money they owed back then. Of course, not everyone could be like this. The cultivators also had to see if they could enter the bundle house's eyes. Chen Pinggan had some guesses about this. It was most likely that the bundle house had a secret treasure that could check other people's fortune. Otherwise, how could there be such a way of doing business in the world? Chen Pinggan thanked the talisman beauty first, then asked, "If I take a fancy to any item, can I buy it on credit?" The talisman beauty smiled and nodded, "Anything is fine. Our bundle house only has one request. After you have walked through all 99 rooms, Sword Immortal cannot turn back." Chen Pinggan looked at Li Huai. Li Huai nodded and said, "Then let's go to the next room to take a look." Madame Ruoyon said in her heart, "Hidden official, I actually still have some savings. It's enough to buy this fan." Chen Pinggan smiled and said, "There's no need." Actually, Chen Pinggan wanted to owe the bundle house a favor first. Only then would there be a return of favors. In the end, they had walked through more than 30 rooms. Li Huai's eyes were a little dry. Only then did they make up their minds. They took a fancy to a rather strange item. It was a stone the size of a fist, engraved with the 2 words Mountain Immortal. There was a pocket-sized willow tree with old roots entrenched in it, like a bonsai. Under the tree stood a tree spirit of the sea-viewing realm. He looked like a white-haired old man, calling himself the Old Immortal of the southern city. Seeing the guests entering the room, the latter was slightly tempted. Just as they had the thought of buying it, the old man cursed loudly, jumped up and spat at the chi cultivators, saying, "You blind things, how dare you invite me to stay in your house? If you're so capable, why don't you just ascend to heaven?" The bundle house's price was only 10 grains of grain rain money. The realm of the willow tree spirit, the material of the mountain rock and so on, the talisman beauty in the room would explain to the guests one by one. However, the items sold in this secret realm of mountain water were not all priceless and rare items. Even the dozens of grains of snow were also sold. The rooms with a high threshold would not be able to hang the wooden sign. The rooms with a low threshold would be able to afford it. The customers would get it on a first-come first-served basis. By the time Li Huai and the old willow tree were staring at each other, the old willow tree spirit was probably feeling thirsty after scolding the old willow tree spirit with its back against the stone wall. It took off the wine gourd from its waist and gulped down a large mouthful of wine. It was only 10 grains of grain rain money. Chen Pinggan could have bought it himself. However, after some hesitation, he still signed a contract with the talisman beauty. It could be considered an IOU for only 10 grains of grain rain money. After that, Chen Pinggan pulled his money together and borrowed the grain rain money from Liu Kaicheng and Madame Ruoyan. One after another, he bought a few items that Li Huai found attractive. An expensive subduing demon pagoda, a pair of small golden gourd earrings with a heavy scent of rouge and powder, and a painting of a Narcissus swimming in the night filled with shrimp soldiers and crab generals. During this time, he met a group of female cultivators on the mountain. Among them, there was a woman with a graceful bearing. She bought all the dozens of robes and dresses in the room without batting an eye. When he reached the next room, there were 10 sets of flower deity cups from the blessed land of 100 flowers. Altogether, there were 1,000 wine cups. She only left 1 set for the people behind her. The other 9 sets were all taken away. Most importantly, Chen Pinggan didn't see the woman take out anything. She didn't pay the bill with the bag shop. The 2 talisman beauties seemed to be used to it. They didn't say a word. Chen Pinggan recognized the woman. She was the Taoist companion of the richest man in the world, the wife of the god of wealth from the Snow Mountain continent. She didn't need to bring money with her when she went out. She could spend as much as she wanted. In the city not far from the Confucian temple, Chen Pinggan clapped his hands and stood up. Jiang Longxiang, who was leaning against the wall, was beaten up and hit with dozens of stones. The old scholar was so angry that his body trembled. "Who are you? Tell me your name if you dare. As a sword immortal, do you think that you're afraid of a cultivator from the middle 5 states?" This middle-aged scholar's face was actually written with 4 words, tough on the outside but timid on the inside. Of course, a scholar would not resort to violence when he was seeking revenge. It would be a disgrace to the scholars. He was going to ask the sages of the Confucian temple to uphold justice and discipline the cultivators who violated the rules with violence. Chen Pinggan pointed at Jiang Longxiang's mouth and reminded him, "This is what you get for not keeping your mouth shut the last time you were here. Are you going to complain to the Confucian temple this time? Think about it yourself. You can say whatever you want, but you only have a few teeth. You should cherish them. Otherwise, you might not be able to speak clearly when you're teaching in your hometown. The students might not understand what you're talking about." Jiang Longxiang's face darkened. His biggest question at the moment was not why the man was attacking him, as it was no longer important, but why did the man have the guts to attack him? Why did none of the sages of the Confucian temple show up when they were so close to him? Chen Pinggan smiled and said, "I don't dare to touch you at the Confucian temple today. However, don't think this is the end of it. I'll travel to the Shao Yuan dynasty in the future. We can catch up then. You don't have to seek revenge." Jiang Longxiang's heart was filled with resentment, bitterness, and fear. "You don't dare to touch me? What do you want the next time we meet?" Chen Pinggan raised his hand and extended his palm. He said with a smile, "I'll settle the score with you. I'll make you pay with interest." Jiang Longxiang struggled to stand up. Chen Pinggan pretended to hit him. Jiang Longxiang was so scared that he quickly turned around. Chen Pinggan smiled and left. The woman with the hedgerow on her head appeared from the corner. She stopped and looked at the green-robed man from afar. Although her face could not be seen, her figure was graceful. She looked like a plum blossom in the corner just by standing there. Chen Pinggan ignored Jiang Longxiang and walked toward the woman with the hedgerow. He cupped his fists and said with a smile, "Greetings, shopkeeper Yao." She smiled and cupped her fists in return. "Child Chen." Chen Pinggan said, "You can call me by my name." The two walked side by side in the alley. The woman beside Chen Pinggan was Zhonyang. She first left the Great Spring Dynasty with Zun Yuan and went to the Yugue sect. She cultivated there for several years. After that, she left the Tongya continent with the great celestial master Zhao Tianlai. She cultivated in the back mountain of the Celestial Master's mansion on Longhu Mountain. She and the ten-tailed celestial fox Lian Zhan were of the same origin but different bloodlines. They were naturally close. After spending all these years together, they were like sisters. The celestial fox Lian Zhan's Tao was high and extremely detached. He had lived in the mountains for a long time and had an ethereal qi. He was no longer comparable to ordinary demons. He liked to listen to Zhonyang's stories of Jianghu. Even the battles of wits and courage between the Yamen constables of Hua Town and the evil spirits were interesting to him. Zhonyang turned her head and lifted a corner of the hedgerow. She smiled and said, "I almost can't recognize you, child Chen." When they met for the first time at the Great Spring Border Inn, Chen Pinggan was still a teenager. He was dressed in a white robe with a red wine gourd hanging from his waist. Beside him was a mischievous little girl with charcoal hair and a few different retinues. He was once a teenager, but now he was a slender man in a green robe. He was worthy of being called the Sword Immortal of the mountain. Chen Pinggan smiled and said, "Shopkeeper Yarrow is still as charming as ever. I miss the 5 years of plum wine brewed in the inn and the roasted whole lamb. It's really a delicacy that can't be found on the mountain or at the foot of the mountain." Zhonyang loosened her fingers and let go of the hedgerow. "Don't call me shopkeeper Yarrow. It's too formal. Child, just call me Zhonyang." Chen Pinggan smiled and nodded. The first time he heard of the phrase "life is narrow, and the wine cup is wide" was from this Zhonyang at the table. Zhonyang smiled and asked, "That Wei Hailiang, is he not following you as a retinue anymore?" That martial artist surnamed Wei claimed to have a great appetite. In the end, that man became a pile of mud after drinking a bowl of wine and snoring thunderously on the table. It left a deep impression. Chen Pinggan shook his head. "Everyone has their own lives." Zhonyang sighed. "That's true." Chen Pinggan said in his mind, "I heard that Zhong Kuei is still in the Western Buddhist kingdom." He missed this meeting. Zhonyang and Chen Pinggan had nothing to reminisce about. Although their relationship wasn't bad, it wasn't enough for Zhonyang to come looking for him. She didn't ask him anything, but she was here to ask him questions. Zhonyang said, "What's the point of mentioning him? He's neither human nor ghost. He likes to ask for trouble." Chen Pinggan said, "Zhong Kuei was timid back then. Maybe it was because he guessed what would happen later. He had no choice but to be bold." Zhonyang rolled her eyes. "He's timid." She then smiled. "His timidness has nothing to do with me. He's just an accountant. It's up to fate whether we meet or leave." Chen Pinggan didn't say anything else. After chatting with Zhonyang about the recent situation of the Great Quan Empire, they parted ways. Zhong Kuei and Zhonyang, who had a special identity, were like a muddled account in a marriage book. Zhonyang, or Madame Huan Shou, was most angry with Zhong Kuei, who was the accountant. It wasn't even because Zhong Kuei hid his identity as a gentleman of the academy and watched her, Madame Huan Shou's, actions. It was just that Zhong Kuei was too cowardly. All of his seemingly audacious nonsense was actually cowardly. "I might not agree to your request. But since you like me, why don't you dare to say that you like me? What's going on?" Perhaps what she hoped for was for Zhong Kuei, the accountant, to behave himself and stand in front of her, sincerely saying the word like. Women weren't completely unreasonable. It was just that the reason a man spoke was often different from the reason they wanted to hear. A woman's reason was more in her mood. If a man couldn't even understand why she was being unreasonable, then there was nothing he could do. Naturally, the more he spoke, the more mistakes he would make. Chen Pinggan had always felt that he was just a little late in understanding the relationship between men and women. In fact, he was really talented and knew a lot. Even if his senior brothers of the same sect were added together, they still wouldn't be as good as him. He even dared to say such words in front of senior brother Zhuo and senior brother Zhun Qian. Of course, the prerequisite was that the teacher was beside them. Chen Pinggan walked alone in the alley and suddenly thought of something. Previously, he had traveled with Zheng Juzhong on the Wenjin crossing. Actually, the city lord of White Emperor City only said 3 sentences along the way. Chen Pinggan just listened. Fei Ran and Zhu Qinggao. Undoubtedly, They were the two most prominent people in the desolate world in this confrontation between the two worlds. Zhang Juzhong only commented, Feiran is very smart and has a bright future ahead of her. Zhu Qinggao's fate may be more pitiful. Therefore, if you have the chance to review the situation, you should satisfy him. Another sentence had a deeper meaning. Life is like a dream. With a single thought, one will be startled awake. The last sentence was truly the words of a senior. I called you Mr. Chen before going out to meet you. The reason is very simple. The person I am meeting today is not the young reclusive official of today, but the future Mr. Chen at the top of the mountain. Following this, Chen Pinggan planned to go to the Q-asking boxing competition. On the night boat in Consonant City, a handsome young man with antlers on his head followed his mistress. He took the initiative to greet Ning Yaro's group, saying that they were welcome to stay. Chen Pinggan didn't receive such treatment before. When they passed by Consonant City, the two sides nearly came to blows. They stayed in an immortal residence in Consonant City. In the night, Ning Yaro brought Pei Qian, Xiaomi, and the white-haired boy to sit on the roof and admire the moon. Along the way, every time Ning Yaro passed by a city, she would slash out with her sword and break the fairy's restrictions. The night boat didn't have any intention of stopping her. At this moment, Ning Yaro smiled and asked, Xiaomi, will you have to go to fewer places in the North Continent because of me? Xiaomi thought about it carefully and shook her head. No. She had to think about it carefully. She couldn't just blurt it out casually. That would be too insincere. Pei Qian sat at the side, feeling a little nervous. He was really worried that Xiaomi would speak nonsense. Xiaomi glanced at Pei Qian from the corner of her eyes. Then, she leaned back and secretly stretched out her hand behind her back. She gave Pei Qian a thumbs up to take credit and praise herself. She wasn't a little fool. Previously, there were some small mistakes at the inn in Entry City. In fact, she deliberately pretended to be a fool. Xiaomi hesitated for a long time and asked carefully, Madam Mountain Chieftain, are you worried that the good Mountain Chieftain will like someone else? Ning Yaro smiled and didn't say anything. Xiaomi hugged her knees with both hands and said softly, that's not true. Back then, I was standing in the big wicker basket behind him and accompanied the good Mountain Chieftain to roam the pugilistic world. We walked for a long time and every time he met a pretty girl, he would ignore them. The good Mountain Chieftain likes you a lot. Ning Yaro said, actually, I've never been worried. It's just that if I don't do this, I often don't know what to say when I talk to him. Ning Yaro paused for a moment. Actually, I'm still worried. How could she not be worried at all? She was a little worried. If Chen Pinggan wanted to go to a place, he would definitely go there. No matter how far he went, he wouldn't change his mind. However, if he wanted to leave a place, he would definitely not turn back. Xiaomi asked curiously, Madam Mountain Chieftain, I heard from the good Mountain Chieftain that the two of you fell in love at first sight. Ning Yaro didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She ignored this. What love at first sight? There was no such thing. She said to Xiaomi, just call me Sister Ning. Pei Qian deliberately choked on his wine and coughed a few times. Xiaomi immediately understood. Did she say something wrong? She immediately tried to salvage the situation. I know. The good Mountain Chieftain fell in love with Sister Ning at first sight. At that time, Sister Ning was still hesitating whether to like the good Mountain Chieftain or not, right? Ning Yaro thought for a moment and shook her head with a smile. That's not true. When we first met at Mud Bottle Alley, I didn't like him and he didn't like me. Xiaomi immediately crossed her arms and turned to look at Ning Yaro. She said seriously, that's not true. The good Mountain Chieftain said that at that time, he just didn't know that he liked you. Ning Yaro was so angry that she laughed. You even told him the truth. However, she was happy to hear this for the first time. The white-clothed youth and the green-clothed scholar swaggered back to the Immortal Inn at Egret Ferry on Mount Shangyang. Tian Wan's real body was still hiding in Mount Shangyang. However, she was forced to show up at Egret Ferry by these two idiots. This was because the two of them had not only seen through her clone's escape technique, but they had also captured all of her soul. If it was only her soul or spirit that had been captured, Tian Wan was prepared for the worst. She could just give it up. She had her own methods to make up for her great Tao. However, since she had both her soul and spirit, it was not up to her. Jiang Shangzhen smiled and said to Sister Tian Wen, who was dressed in pink and green, "The moon on the water is as far away as the sky. The flowers in front of you are like looking in a mirror. It's easy to see a person dressed in jade, but difficult to approach." On the other side of the great wall of sword aura, a figure fell straight to the ground. Feng Shuetao, a great cultivator who was forcibly ascended to another world, felt dizzy. He stabilized his body with great difficulty and looked into the distance. He was in the wilderness. As for a certain son of a B*TCH, he stood on the shoulder of this ascendant state cultivator and stroked his hair with both hands. He sighed, "Look into the distance." 800, Feng Shuetao asked, "Why did you bring me here?" The great cultivators at the peak of Haoran Mountain had to follow many rules if they wanted to ascend. First, they needed the permission of the Confucian temple, and then the Confucian sage in the sky screen to open the door for them. Otherwise, they would get lost easily and end up in all kinds of strange beyond heaven secret realms. Moreover, the process of cultivators ascending and traveling was extremely dangerous as well. They had to come into contact with the long river of time that was formed from the Grand Tao, and the slightest carelessness would cause their cultivation to be greatly depleted and their lifespan to be reduced. Therefore, this time, Feng Shuetao traveled the Great Wall of Sword Qi hand in hand with Alliance. With Alliance opening the way, Feng Shuetao walked very easily. As for why Alliance did not go through the gate of the inverted hanging mountain and came to the wilderness, Feng Shuetao was too lazy to ask. He just took it as this guy showing off his sword skills. Alliance said, "You're not the same as that Qinggong Taibao." Feng Shuetao sneered, "Not the same? Didn't I get hit by his sword?" Alliance laughed, "You're quite hot-tempered, aren't you?" Nan Guangzhao, Jing Hao, Feng Shuetao. The three ascendants' Daoist names were Tianxiu, Qinggong Taibao, and Qing Mi. Each one was more arrogant than the other. "I'm not." When Alliance thought of this, he felt a little sad. This Feng Shuetao beneath his feet had a personal grudge with the old sword immortal of the Central Plains, Zhu Shenji. Feng Shuetao had been born as a mountain cultivator. His Dao name was Qing Mi, and it was not for nothing. Naturally, he would not be stingy with his shady dealings. There were definitely plenty of shady dealings that were unethical. Jing Hao, on the other hand, was the most authentic library master. He was born on the mountain and was a natural cultivator. His cultivation in this life was very smooth. Back then, the demons of the wilderness crushed the mountains and rivers of the Jinjia continent and crossed the sea to the southern end of the Liuxia continent. Jing Hao was in the ancestral hall for a meeting. At the beginning, at least half of the cultivators of the Dragon Gate realm and above would go down the mountain and rush to the south to fight to the death. Some of them were old and had no hope of breaking through to the next realm. There were also many cultivators whose family and friends had died in the drifting Dawn continent. Thus, they came out of the mountains to kill demons, both for the greater good and to avenge their personal grudges. However, this great sect that was second to none in the flowing Dawn continent had unexpectedly chosen to seal itself off from the outside world. Not to mention the constant criticism from the outside world, even the sect itself was puzzled. It was said that the sect master, who was going to personally lead the team down the mountain, suddenly changed his mind at the end of the meeting at the ancestral hall. This was because he had received secret instructions from the old ancestor, Jing Hao, to preserve his strength. It would not be too late to wait until the army of the demon race advanced to the north and fought their way to the gates of their own mountains. They could take advantage of the geographical advantage and learn from Fuyao Continent's Heavenly Rumble Village and Tongyi Continent's Lotus Flower City. They could defend their mountains to the death and do things more steadily. They could also contribute to their hometowns. If the drifting Dawn continent lost, they would strive to protect themselves. If the world won, then the vast southern territory of the continent would be cleared of all the immortals on the mountains. It would be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for the sect to expand their territory and gather vassals. As for how the outside world learned of this rumor, It was because that sect master immediately lost his position as sect master after the ancestral master came out of seclusion and was punished. Nominally, he was a hindrance to the war effort. As a sect master, he was irresponsible and ashamed of his ancestors who were hung on the statues. He had to face the wall and reflect on his mistakes for 100 years. Feng Shuetao asked, "Can you come down and talk?" In the ruins of the Great Wall of Sword Qi, apart from a Confucian temple accompanying a sage, there were also several great cultivators from various continents who were stationed here. They were all watching the show. Alliance complained, "If you tell me to come down, I'll come down. Do you think I don't have any face? You're just stupid. If you told me not to come down, do you think I wouldn't come down?" Feng Shuetao could only pick up his identity as a rogue cultivator. "Anyway, I'm a rogue cultivator. What face do I need?" Alliance did not embarrass Feng Shuetao too much. He floated to the ground and sat on the edge of the wall. He tapped the wall with his heel and took out a pot of wine. Feng Shuetao hesitated for a moment. He squatted down and looked towards the south. He asked, "That's the old blind man's Shiwen Mountains?" Alliance nodded. "It's considered my territory. I often go there to drink and eat meat. Back then, the old blind man took 18 of my swords. He admired my swordsmanship very much. He said that if I wasn't young and handsome, he would have mistaken me for Chen Qing. He would have used all his strength to attack." Feng Shuetao's words went in one ear and out the other. He just said to himself, "Alliance, why did you stop me from using my swords? At most, I'll just stand still and take a hit. At most, I'll drop my realm." Alliance said, "In my impression, rogue cultivators like you are very good at calculating. If you want to drop your realm, go to the south. What's going on in the vast world? Your reputation is not good." Feng Shuetao asked, "That's why I don't understand why you want to help me." Alliance said, "Do you remember the 16th year of the autumn hunt of a certain dynasty in the Central Plains? That dynasty ordered a few vassals, joined forces with a few big neighboring countries, all the immortal masters of the archives, and the gods of the mountains and rivers to hold a great hunt and kill demons and ghosts." Feng Shuetao was expressionless. "I don't remember." Alliance said, "I remember that there was a rogue cultivator who was passing by. He fought and beat up 2 immortals. Those immortal masters of the archives were very embarrassed." Feng Shuetao was puzzled. Why mention such a small matter? He just couldn't stand the way those immortal masters of the archives acted. They were young, but all of them were old and cunning. They were good at currying favor. Alliance drank his wine and said casually, "If the immortal sects where cultivators gather only moved the government from the foot of the mountain to the top of the mountain, I think it's very boring." Feng Shuetao just squatted and felt bored. Alliance turned his head. "Can you have the courage to prove that the Confucian temple misjudged you and attacked the wrong person?" Feng Shuetao sneered. "Forget it. To be honest, I don't think I'm wrong, but I don't think they're wrong either." Alliance rubbed his chin and sighed. "There's no rogue cultivator in the upper 5 realms in the world." Feng Shuetao felt a little sad. If this son of a B*TCH was willing to talk seriously, he wouldn't be as bad as the rumors said. Alliance asked, "Do you have any sword cultivator friends in your life?" Feng Shuetao shook his head. "I have many fair-weather friends. I don't have any close friends." To be precise, he didn't have any friends. A long time ago, he had one. Alliance stood up and laughed. "Then I'll have to congratulate you." Feng Shuetao knew something was wrong. As expected, Alliance said seriously, "As long as you accompany me through the boorish land, you'll have a sword cultivator friend." Feng Shuetao smiled bitterly. "Do I have no choice? Through the boorish land?" Feng Shuetao wasn't an idiot. Alliance said earnestly, "Don't worry. I can protect an ascendant realm cultivator." Feng Shuetao sighed and began to think of a way to escape. However, when he thought about the boorish land, he felt that the son of a B*TCH beside him was much more familiar with it than he was. How could he escape? The man threw away the empty wine bottle and held his forehead with his hands. Invincible boorish land cultivator, sword cultivator Alliance. He didn't want to wait for Sister Lu Ji. He wanted to leave her with a handsome and majestic back. Feng Shuetao sorted out the messy emotions in his heart and sighed. He raised his eyebrows and looked to the south. After a moment of silence, he smiled and imitated Alliance's way of speaking. He muttered to himself, "Wild cultivator Qing Mi, Feng Shuetao of the snowy mountain continent." In the Parrot continent, after visiting 99 rooms, Chen Pinggan didn't return with a full load, but he gained a lot. Chen Pinggan asked Liu Kai-cheng if he could help find a place to stay on the island. He planned to cook a meal for everyone. Liu Kai-cheng said of course there was no problem. He had a lot of friends on the mountain. There were not many who didn't know him and had never heard of him. The old tree spirit, who called himself the Lord of Heaven in the south of the city, seemed to have an immortal restriction on his body. He couldn't return to his true form for the time being. He was about 3 inches tall. At this moment, he was sitting on the shoulder of the young Taoist and drinking. He squinted at the boastful Liu Kai-cheng, who was dressed in fancy clothes, and cursed him for being a sissy. However, Liu Kai-cheng grabbed him and squeezed him in the palm of his hand before throwing him back to the young Taoist. The old tree spirit was drunk and disoriented. He asked Li Huai, "Your trusted subordinate was bullied. Are you not going to do anything?" Li Huai said he couldn't do anything. The old tree spirit immediately stood up and put the wine bottle on his waist. He straightened his clothes and bowed. "This immortal master is wearing a pink robe. She is really unique, like a peerless beauty who stands alone in the world." Liu Kai-cheng felt bored and slapped the old tree spirit gently. The old tree spirit held the mountain with both hands and complained incessantly. Li Huai had to intercede for Liu Kai-cheng. Liu Kai-cheng stopped. The willow tree spirit didn't dare to scold the pink-robed immortal master. He turned his head and spat. Suddenly, he remembered that this was the young Taoist's territory and quickly wiped it with the tip of his foot. Li Huai remembered something and said to Chen Pinggan telepathically, "The old man left a package for you at the Yang family's drugstore. He said in the letter that you can go to his house and get it." Chen Pinggan nodded. Li Huai took out a yellowed book from his sleeve. "Luo Po Mountain became a sect, but I didn't attend the ceremony. It's overshadowed, right? The old man gave it to me. It's full of messy scribbles. I don't want to learn it, and I can't learn it. Just looking at it gives me a headache. I'll give it to you, don't mind it." Chen Pinggan didn't refuse. He took it and said, "Consider it a loan. I'll return it to you after reading it." Li Huai said angrily, "Give it back to me." Chen Pinggan smiled and said, "You haven't finished reading it yet." Chen Pinggan suddenly stopped and turned around. It was the old sword cultivator Yu Yu. He had also finished walking around the bundle shop with the other tycoons. Other than the Miyun Xie clan, there were also young ladies from the Xianxiaju clan. However, they were not as likable as sword cultivator Zhu Mai. Yu Yu said to the young man beside him with a smile, "Xie Yuan, I'm in a good mood today. I'll tell you a secret. Can you keep your mouth shut?" The disciple of the Miyun Xie family from the Snow Peak continent was a little shameless. He said to the chief foreign minister of his family, "I promised Mr. Yu first. As for whether I can keep my mouth shut, I'll see. After all, it's not up to me." Yu Yu said, "You came to the Confucian temple to join in the fun. The person you want to meet the most is right in front of you." Xie Yuan walked over quickly. This handsome disciple didn't seem to have any doubts. He bowed to the green-robed sword immortal but didn't say anything. Silence spoke louder than words. This was called Xie Yuan bowing his head to the hidden official. Chen Pinggan looked at Yu Yu. The old sword practitioner laughed in his mind, "Master hidden official, don't worry. Xie Yuan looks like he doesn't know what's important, but he knows what's important. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been groomed as the next master of the Xie family." He heard about Master Hidden Official's deeds through the family's secret channel in his early years and admired you. He even wrote erotic books about Lady Ruoyon from the Plum Blossom Garden, Nayland Saihuan from the Great Wall of Sword Aura, and the female sword immortal Song Pin from the Golden Armor continent. Senior Hidden Official may not know this, but in the past 10 years in the Pure Jade continent, 40 to 50% of the most widely circulated erotic books on the mountain were written by Xie Yuan. The number of female cultivators who wanted to beat him, if not 100, then at least 80. Chen Pinggan returned the greeting with a fist salute to the young man. In fact, he wanted to punch this Jiang Shangzhen from the Snow Peak continent to the ground. Xie Yuan straightened his back and suddenly reached out his hand. He probably wanted to grab Chen Pinggan's sleeve, but he didn't succeed. The young man said resentfully, "I want to touch the celestial aura so that I can write like a god." Chen Pinggan reminded him with a smile, "Master Xie, there are some books that shouldn't be spread." Xie Yuan looked at Lady Ruoyan beside the young hidden official and nodded. They were both men, so they understood tacitly. They parted ways. Xie Yuan wanted to visit a senior who was staying in the Parrot continent. The young flower goddess, whose nickname was Rui Feng was full of joy. She rode the wind and rushed to the Parrot continent. She curtsied to the young secluded officer and thanked him sincerely. She said that Teacher Zhong was not angry, but happy. Chen Pinggan smiled and nodded. He invited the flower goddess to be a guest at the Luo Po mountain in the future. In fact, at the entrance of Liu Xianyang's ancestral home in his hometown, there was a small canal passing by. Between the cracks of the rocks, there was a balsamia that was suspended in mid-air. The flowers bloomed in 5 different colors. In the early years, many young girls in his hometown seemed to like to pick the flowers and crush them, dyeing their fingernails bright red. Chen Pinggan didn't think it was pretty at that time. Liu Xianyang had always talked about this flower growing in front of his house. The elders had a story about feng shui. In the end, a greedy little slug came to his house with a small hoe and secretly dug it away in the middle of the night. After daybreak, Liu Xianyang squatted in front of the door for a long time, cursing and swearing. That night, the little snot bug that had secretly planted the balsamine elsewhere was pulled by the ear and returned. To Liu Xianyang, who was in the dark, the balsamine at the door seemed to have grown legs of its own, running away from home and returning to its home. Liu Xianyang was very happy to have regained what he had lost. He said that this flower was indeed strange. At that time, Chen Pinggan nodded and the little slug rolled his eyes and made a face. In fact, when Liu Xianyang and Chen Pinggan each went to study and returned home, they both became mountain dwellers. It was then that they realized that the balsamia that looked beautiful in the past was actually just ordinary. Madame Huiyang bid farewell to Chen Pinggan and left. She brought the balsamia flower goddess to the bag shop again. She had secretly taken a liking to a few items. Liu Kaicheng walked to the door of a mansion in Parrot Island halfway up the mountain and knocked on the door. A timid girl walked out. Her family's elders and a few good friends on the mountain were all on guard. They didn't dare to come out to meet this Liu Daochun from White Emperor City. In the end, they let her come. As for the green shirt sword immortal and the young Taoist, the young female cultivator didn't even dare to look at them. Even if she came from a sect, she didn't dare to be rash in the face of these fierce people who could arm wrestle with the leaders of big sects. Liu Kaicheng smiled and said, "Miss, I am close friends with your family's elders. Can you let me borrow your house to entertain my friends?" The female cultivator nodded vigorously. Her master said that as long as Liu Daochun asked, she would agree to anything. Liu Kaicheng pinched out a grain rain coin with 2 fingers and said, "Miss, after you take this grain rain coin, remember to return me 2 small summer coins." Her eyes were filled with doubt, but she didn't dare to disobey. After accepting the grain rain coin, she took out 2 small coins from her sleeves and handed them to the famous pavilion master of the colored glass pavilion with fear and trepidation. Liu Kaicheng said with a smile, "There are so many beauties in the world. If 10 small summer coins were the full number, you would be very beautiful. Today, I see that your marriage is not shallow. It is a feast for my eyes. May I ask your name, where do you live, where do you cultivate, and whether you have a Taoist companion?" Chen Pinggan came to Liu Chicheng's side and slapped him on the back of the head. Then he apologized to the young female cultivator and said, "Sorry to disturb you." If he knew that Liu Kaicheng had friends all over the mountain, he wouldn't have asked. The girl shook her head and didn't say a word. She just made way for the door. The cultivators in the house had already left from the side door. They didn't dare to ride the wind. They met the young female cultivator at the ferry and left Parrot Island by ferry. The girl was anxious, but her master smiled in his heart and said, "You have made a contribution. When we go back, the ancestral hall will record it." After entering the house, in a secluded courtyard surrounded by cypress trees, Chen Pingan first took out the fish basket from his sleeve. Then he opened the box and took out the tools skillfully. He was ready to show off his skills to Li Baoping and Li Huai. Li Huai and Taoist nun brought in a table and chairs. Liu Kaicheng took out a few pots of immortal wine. The table was full of dishes. There were a few golden carps, steamed, braised, and stewed fish. They looked, smelled, and tasted good. Chen Pingan asked with a smile, "How is it?" Li Baoping nodded and said, "It's delicious." Li Huai said, "It's much better than Pei Qian's." Liu Kaicheng and Taoist nun looked at each other. They both felt that they had to show some strength of character and not say anything that went against their conscience. Chen Pingan glanced at the two guys who were eating so much that they became mutes. He nodded with satisfaction. Maybe this was what it meant to be beautiful without words. After eating and drinking to their heart's content, Chen Pingan put down his chopsticks. Li Baoping was still chewing slowly, and Li Huai was still wolfing down the food. Li Huai suddenly felt embarrassed. He approached Chen Pingan and said in a low voice, "Chen Pingan, I've read a few books. Can I talk to you about the principles in the books? If it's not right, you can forget about it." Chen Pingan smiled and said, "Of course, you can. Just say it." Li Huai still didn't seem to be very confident. He only dared to talk to Chen Pingan secretly through telepathy. The books say that when a person has both great achievements and worries about himself, his life will be more tiring. Because he works hard on the outside, he works hard on the inside. You have a lot of titles now, so I hope you can find a few ways to relax. For example, liking fishing is good. The eyes of this young man in a scholarly robe were full of worry at this moment. Li Huai had never been good at reasoning with people. Today, he had done his best. Chen Pingan nodded and said, "Such a good principle. I will definitely take it to heart." Li Huai laughed. If he could reason with Chen Pingan, then it would be a pity if he didn't become a sage. Chen Pingan clenched his fist and gently knocked on his stomach. "All the good principles I read in the books and heard are my principles as long as they are in my stomach." Li Huai looked at him and said, "Chen Pingan." Chen Pingan was puzzled. "What's wrong?" Li Huai chuckled and said, "You are called Chen Pingan, so you must be safe. With you here, we will think about finding a chance to get together. Even if there is nothing to talk about, we still need to get together." Chen Pingan was not here, so it seemed that everyone was leaving it up to fate. Of course, they were still friends, but it seemed that they didn't want to meet again. Chen Pingan smiled and nodded. Li Huai lowered his head and continued to eat. "You are welcome." Blockhead Lin, of course, they were all good friends, but his temperament was a bit light. He didn't care about meeting after a long separation. And that Yu Lu, the reverse homonym was Yu Lu. He probably said that there are survivors of the Lu family, or perhaps he was expressing his will and not forgetting his origin. Yu Lu constantly reminded him that I am a descendant of the Lu family. That year, only Yu Lu would take the initiative to keep watch with Chen Pingan. In addition, that year at the Great Sui Kingdom Academy, Yu Lu stood up for him and hit him the hardest. Li Huai always remembered that. In fact, Li Huai missed them. Of course, there was also Shi Jiachuan, that little abacus. He heard that even her child had reached the age where she could talk about marriage. That year on the long journey, Li Huai was the closest to Chen Pingan, but he was also the most afraid of Chen Pingan. Because Li Huai intuitively knew that Chen Pingan was patient, good-tempered, generous, and most willing to give things to others. He always cared about others first. If such a good-tempered person became angry and ignored him, then it would really be difficult for him to travel the long journey. There was no water in the mountains, and the sun was scorching. It was really difficult to find a stream. His mouth was dry, and his lips were chapped. The straw sandals youth held a hatchet and said that he would go take a look. When Chen Pingan returned, more than an hour had passed. His body was covered with bamboo tubes filled with water. Li Huai would forget many trivial things, but he would never forget the feeling that Chen Pinggan gave him. It was as if he was saying, "I'm here, everything will be fine." At that time, Li Huai would think that Chen Pinggan was older and had suffered since he was young, so he knew everything. Naturally, he knew more than Lin Shuyi, who was a child from a rich family. He knew how to climb mountains and go into the water. He knew more about how to make a living from the heavens. When Li Huai himself was 14, he realized that this was not the case. Later on, even if he was 10 years older, he would wait until he was 24. No one would be willing to deal with those trivial things every day. Li Huai always felt that taking care of other people's hearts was a very tiring thing. He did not know how to, and did not have the patience. Luckily, Mr. Qi had abducted Chen Pinggan for them. On the road, there would always be a straw sandals youth with a hatchet at his waist, leading the way. On the road of life, walking together with Chen Pinggan would be a very stable path. Because Chen Pinggan seemed to always be the first to think of trouble, and when he saw trouble, he would solve it. Kui Dongshan had once said, "The simpler the reason, the easier it was to understand, but at the same time, the harder it was to understand the reason that truly belonged to oneself." He had also said that many people relied on luck to get to where they were. But many people relied on their own abilities to make their lives more and more difficult. Liu Kaicheng looked at the red-clothed lady, and then looked at Li Huai. This fearless owner of the glazed pavilion had a lot of emotions in that moment. The younger generation of Pearl Paradise was gradually being viewed as the opening the door generation by the Aquarius continent. But because the Mountain Water Bulletin was not up to date, there were currently a lack of people. But Liu Kaicheng was different. At that time, he had brought brother Longbo and personally walked through the small town of Huaihuan County, and had personally seen all the different young people. If not for Li Liu and the lady. There was also Luo Po Mountains Chen Pinggan, Dragon Spring Sword Sect's Liu Xianyang, White Emperor City's Jiyu Can Apricot Blossom Alley's Ma Ku Shen, Clay Bottle Alley's Song Jisin, Dali Vassal King, Fortune Street's Zhao Yarrow, Dali Capital's Ministry of Justice Assistant Minister, Peach Leaf Alley's Xieling, Dragon Spring Sword Sect's direct disciple, Lin Shuyi from the Construction Supervision Office. Of course, there was also Cliff Academy's Li Baoping, Li Huai. Chen Pinggan laughed and asked, "Baoping, what books have you been reading recently?" Li Baoping shook his head, "Not reading, just thinking about some things." Chen Pinggan asked curiously, "What things?" Li Baoping said, "There's one thing, I'm thinking about why I lost to Yuan Zhan in the last argument. On the way here, I already figured it out. There are two other things that are difficult." Chen Pinggan laughed, "Tell me about them." Li Baoping thought for a moment and pointed to the table. "For example, the books say that literary thoughts are like a fountain. I've been thinking about how scholars get their literary thoughts. I thought of a way, imagining that I have a chessboard in my mind, and then I put a word in each grid, like living in a house, sad, happy, lonely, sad, angry, and so on. After I filled up a chessboard with great difficulty, there was trouble again. Because all the words were very troublesome. Should I take a step in each grid, just like how youngest Marshall Uncle had to greet Song Jisin next door when he walked in Clay Bottle Alley, or could I take a few steps in one go? Could I walk directly to Jiyu Kan or the Cow family's ancestral house? Or could I just jump from one grid to another? Could youngest Marshall Uncle jump from Clay Bottle Alley to Apricot Blossom Alley and my house on Fulu Street? Or could you go directly to Sister Dao Ya's Peach Blossom Alley because you want to see peach blossoms? I can't even think of a good rule. Apart from this, there's also the addition of sad and sad words. If sad and happy words meet each other, it's subtraction. The addition, subtraction, and subtraction will need another rule." Li Baoping swiped horizontally, then raised his hands vertically. Then, he tilted and tilted, as if he was overlapping two worlds. "Other than emotions, I thought of a second chessboard. It's a more concrete word, such as a bridge, flowing water, a door, a friend, a book. There's another chessboard. Because there are many thoughts, other than staying in the grid, it's like thinking blindly at home. They must have seen something, that's why they have the synesthesia, translocation, and imagination. When I was thinking about this, I thought of another thing, which is even more difficult. For example, the book says that one is born from one. I'll assume that this one is 1 point. Youngest martial uncle, for example. Li Baoping's thoughts jumped around, and she spoke quickly, making her seem very imaginative. When she said Dao begets one, Li Baoping pressed her thumb and index finger together, as if she was pinching a mustard seed. She reached out and placed it in the air. The moment she said one is born from two, Li Baoping suddenly let go and immediately had 2 horizontal lines. 2 vertical lines pierced through the mustard seed. In the blink of an eye, countless more straight lines were formed. Chen Pinggan instantly took out a caged sparrow. This immortal inn built on top of Egret Ferry Mountain was called Cloud Crossing Inn. In addition to the reed marsh at the foot of the mountain, there were large terrace-like paddy fields nearby. Egrets flew in circles, and sparrows grabbed the reed stalks. It was quiet and peaceful, giving off a rustic vibe. Fishermen on the water and farmers in the fields were already used to the rise and fall of the immortal ferries. Egret Ferry was less than 100 miles away from the nearest Qing Wu Peak. These people at the foot of the mountain had lived in the boundary of Zhengyang Mountain for generations, so they had seen many immortals on the mountain. Kui Dongshan personally brewed tea for the guests. The white-robed youth was like a cloud, making people forget about the world. After Tian Wen sat down, she took a cup of tea from Kui Dongshan, but she did not dare to drink it. After all, she was here with her real body today. Previously, she had used all her means, including using her yin spirit to travel far away, her yang spirit to escape far away, and her camouflage technique. Unexpectedly, they were all intercepted by the 2 people in front of her. Moreover, they seemed to be certain that her real body was still in Zhengyang Mountain, which made Tian Wan feel helpless. She had manipulated the red string and played with people's hearts in the Aquarius continent for many years, and this was the first time she felt that her plans were not as good as God's. Kui Dongshan smiled and said, "This is the tea that my husband brought back from Qingyuan Prefecture's Xianyu County. It's very precious and priceless. I'm usually reluctant to drink it. Sister Tian Wen, try it. If it's good, you don't have to pay. After drinking the tea, we'll talk about business." Tian Wen sneered and said, "Aren't you afraid that I'll send people to Xianyu County to track you down?" Kui Dongshan said helplessly, "Smart people don't say stupid things. Sister Tian Wen, you're being insincere." Tian Wan was smart because she never did anything superfluous. This was also the reason why she could live in seclusion in Zhengyang Mountain in the Aquarius continent. This junior sister of Zhu Zi could make many smart people think that she was only a little clever. Zhengyang Mountain's sect Master Bamboo Emperor, Pure Jade Realm's Patriarch Xia Yuansui, Dao family's Patriarch Dao Yanbo, and the sect's discipline Master Yang Ji. These old sword immortals whose names shook the entire continent felt that Tian Wan's seat in the ancestral hall of Zhengyang Mountain was actually dispensable. Jiang Shangzhen did not go over to drink the tea. She stood alone by the railing of the observation deck and looked at the children playing by the water. A group of children formed a circle and played a flower tug-of-war known as a shy girl. There was a girl with a red face who won against her peers. She grinned as if she had a decayed tooth. Jiang Shangzhen smiled and squinted her eyes. She leaned on the railing with a gentle gaze and said softly, "Today, I've won the grass tug-of-war." Smiles come from both faces. Kui Dongshan extended a hand to signal Tian Wen to be tactful. "You didn't drink the tea I offered you. Are you determined to drink it as a forfeit?" Tian Wan could only force herself to drink the tea. A moment later, her face turned pale. Even though she was prepared to cast a secret technique to seal the mountain and gather spiritual energy in a few natal aperture points and was prepared for the worst, the remaining spiritual energy in her meridians were only strands that could be ignored. However, when the spiritual energy froze, she felt heart-wrenching pain. In the end, the frozen spiritual energy gathered like rows of driftwood boats and rampaged on the river in her small world. Tian Wan frowned slightly. Jiang Shangzhen turned her head and smiled. "Old weather and old clothes. The egret spies on the fish." Kui Dongshan scolded, "What are you talking about? Do you think Sister Tian Wan can understand you?" The next moment, Tian Wan's face turned pale. She suddenly raised her head and stared at the young man in white. "Aren't you afraid that I'll die with you?" It turned out that at the front of the floating boats, there was a mind of the young man in white in front of her. It was like a boatman carrying wormwood. He wore a green bamboo hat and a green straw raincoat and was singing a poem of the evening on a fishing boat. Kui Dongshan rolled his eyes. In Tian Wan's Heart Lake, the boatman took out a green bamboo fishing rod and threw it out. He lifted the rod and directly pulled the mind out of the Heart Lake. Tian Wan felt a heart-wrenching pain and couldn't help but cover her chest. The young boatman reached out and grabbed the fish. He looked at it carefully and shook his head. "It's really scary." Kui Dongshan crushed the mind and threw it back into the water. He continued to drive the floating boats that were gathering under his feet and swam away. "The egret spies on the fish," Kui Dongshan said, "then let's get down to business." Tian Wan was about to speak. The boatman in the Heart Lake lifted the rod again and reached out to grab a fish. He laughed and said, "It's fine as long as senior brother is here." "Sister Tian Wan, you're not being kind." Tian Wan could only hurriedly activate a Heartroom Daoist supernatural power. In the Heart Lake, the raging river water froze 1,000 miles. The floating boats that were swimming away froze and stopped. The young boatman put his palms together and jumped down. His head hit the ground in the middle of winter. He shouted and flipped his head and feet. He spread out his hands. When his feet touched the ground, colorful ripples spread out on the ice. He squatted down and tapped a few times with his fingers. Then, he slid to another place and tapped a few times with his fingers. He tapped here and there as if he was looking for a suitable place to fish so that he could hammer a hole and throw a rod to catch a big fish. Kui Dongshan's mind turned around and smiled. "It's finally here." A palanquin with gold foil and flower decals appeared in the distance. It was a little like the so-called Wn Gong palanquin in the folk. It was extremely luxurious and exquisite. There was no one to carry the palanquin. The palanquin floated over by itself. Kui Dongshan stood up and said with a smile, "Sister Tian Wan won't be convinced if I don't reveal your secret dowry." He looked around and asked loudly, "Where are Li Tuanjing and his Daoist companion?" He lifted a corner of the curtain of the palanquin and revealed half of Tian Wan's face. She held a mutton-fat white jade toast token in her hand. "Here, I have all the advantages. Are you sure you can defeat an Ascendant Realm Sword Cultivator?" Inside the palanquin, it was like a luxurious lady's boudoir. There was the gold-threaded Phoebe, the cypress wood fu hanging screen, a vermilion bamboo painting by Suzy spread out on the painting table. There was also a copybook, which was the third chief of the Beko Keikyung building, Lu Chen's swordsmanship. There was also a seal that was written by an unknown person. It was suspended in the air in the carriage. The young helmsman formed by the mind ran wildly around the palanquin, shouting, "Don't kill me, don't kill me." Outside the Heart Lake, Kui Dongshan said with a horrified face, "Chief Ju, what should we do?" Sister Tian Wan said, "We definitely can't defeat an Ascendant Realm Sword Cultivator." The young man in white opposite Tian Wan held a teacup in his hand and trembled. Tian Wan really couldn't stand the poor acting skills of the guy in front of her. Was it interesting? Jiang Shangzhen turned around and leaned against the railing. He asked with a smile, "Tian Wan, since when can the combat power of us sword cultivators be calculated on paper?" "A few nascent soul realm sword cultivators are 1 UPU. A few UPU is another immortal. The last Ascendant Realm Cultivator is an Ascendant Realm Cultivator. I don't read much and don't know much. Don't fool me." Kui Dongshan had already estimated Tian Wan's trump card. Chief Ju alone was enough to deal with half an Ascendant Realm Sword Cultivator. However, he still needed his help to catch the big fish, Tian Wan. Kui Dongshan put down the teacup and said, "Let's not talk nonsense. Let's talk business." Tian Wan was about to ask. Kui Dongshan said with a smile, "Yes." Tian Wan was about to speak again. Jiang Shangzhen took out a folding fan and gently fanned it. He said with a smile, "Brother Kui, as the proud disciple of our mountain master, you will keep your word." Jiang Shangzhen added, "What's more, if I don't keep my word, what can you do? Without waiting for Tian Wan to speak, Kui Dongshan said again, you don't have any leeway. If you want to live, you have to agree to one thing. Jiang Shangzhen closed the folding fan and pointed to his wrist. He said, don't you like to play with marriage and matchmaking? Very good. Once you refine this red string, come at me. I will bear the full brunt of the consequences. Tian Wan, who had not had a chance to speak, was livid. In your dreams. The other party's move was really hitting the nail on the head. He grabbed the lifeline of her great Tao. Tian Wan's biggest fear was, of course, that Jiang Shangzhen seemed to be flirtatious but was actually the most ruthless. If it were ordinary men, such as Wei Jin and Liu Baqiao, who were infatuated with love, even if she pulled the strings, she was still confident to get out of trouble. She might even gain some benefits. But once she was involved with Jiang Shangzhen, her end would definitely not be good. Especially when it involved the root of the great Tao. In other words, no matter how far away they were, for Tian Wan, no matter where she escaped to, even if she was in another world, she was still trapped in the cage of love all the time. The most terrible thing was that the longer she delayed, the deeper she would be involved. It was like a willow by the water and a mainstay in the middle of the river. If the two were tied together by an iron chain, the mainstay would definitely not suffer. Jiang Shangzhen's Taoist heart was as stable as a rock, and there was even a turbulent current surging. She could only suffer alone. Jiang Shangzhen complained, I'm not bad looking, and I have a small family background. Now I'm single, and I don't have a Taoist companion on the mountain. How can I not be worthy of Sister Tian Wan? Kui Dongshan laughed and said, I've already said that it's not that difficult for Chief Ju to return to the Ascendant Realm, right? Jiang Shangzhen cupped his fists, raised them high, and shook them heavily. I'm convinced. Tian Wan seemed to be flipping through the marriage book randomly and messing up the destiny of the sword principle of a continent. But once she and Jiang Shangzhen were connected, their relationship would be more like a Taoist companion than a Taoist companion on the mountain. It was a bit similar to the contract between Chen Pinggan and Ji Qiu. If he didn't break the contract, he could now share the water fate and enjoy the fruits of others' work. Moreover, Chen Pinggan was close to the great Tao of water, which was of great benefit to him. He would only get twice the result with half the effort. Therefore, Tian Wan had always thought that the young man was crazy. It seemed to be right. Only such a person would have such a student and disciple. Only Luopa Mountain would have such a chief. Tian Wan sighed and said, I can take out all the information and secrets of Xingyang Mountain in exchange for my freedom. This is a scheme against Liu Xianyang. I'll take out an unrecorded cave to compensate Luopa Mountain. Kui Dongshan laughed and said, an unnamed cave? Since it's not among the 72 small caves, you still have the face to take it out? Tian Wan said with a gloomy face, although this cave is unknown, it can support the cultivation of an Ascendant Realm cultivator. Among them, there's a Jiang Q immortal mansion, which is more mysterious. In addition, there's a Dan stream, which is very heavy and gloomy like jade. It's most suitable for alchemy. There's also a red pine mountain, which has poria, ganoderma, ginseng, spirit trees, and heavenly treasures everywhere. I know Luopa Mountain needs money, a lot of immortal money. Jiang Shangzhen said with a shocked face, money? Kui Dongshan frowned and seemed to be deep in thought. Do we need it? Tian Wan was really disgusted by this pair of clowns. Kui Dongshan narrowed his eyes and said, don't talk about this. If you take out the cicada shedding cave, I might be willing to consider it. Tian Wan shook her head and said, it's not on me. The cicada shedding cave was one of the most important ruins of Jiyu Shu. It was rumored that many ancient sword immortals had ascended from this place and died in the daytime. Their immortal hearts were shed, leaving behind a cicada shedding its skin. Kui Dongshan sighed and said, then there's nothing to talk about. Tian Wan was silent for a long time before asking, what are you guys after? Kui Dongshan crossed his arms and said, my master said that he wants you to return the sword techniques and fate to Aquarius continent. Everything will go back to where it came from. Tian Wan sneered, return it to Aquarius continent. You mean to give it to Luorpa Mountain? Kui Dongshan shook his head, his eyes were pitiful. The frog in the well talks about the sky and the ocean, the summer bug talks about the ice and frost. Time. Heart 2. Chapter 801. In the house of the Parrot Continent, when the man in green and the woman in red suddenly disappeared, Taoist Nun and Liu Kaicheng looked at each other. Chen Pingan's trick was not simple. Li Huai was picking meat with a toothpick, and he seemed to be unaware of it. Don't think too much about things you don't understand. Liu Kaicheng was surprised and asked curiously, Taoism peer Nun, since when can Chen Pingan control heaven and earth? As for the strange phenomenon caused by Li Baoping's words, Liu Kaicheng was not interested in it at all. Daoist Nun picked up a large amount of vegetables with his chopsticks and chewed the fish in big mouthfuls. His cheeks puffed up as he revealed the truth. It's not an immortal spell that competes with one's realm. It's the natal divine ability of one of this kid's flying swords. There are all kinds of strange flying swords in the Great Wall of Sword Chi. Chen Pingan is a secluded official, so you don't have to be surprised. Chapter 802. The bamboo forest was dense with a few thatched cottages. At the door of one of the thatched cottages was the eldest disciple of the female martial god of the Great Duan dynasty, Ma Yuxian. The visitor was a slender man in a long green robe and cloth shoes. He stood in the bamboo forest. From 2 other thatched cottages, 2 women walked out. They looked young, but their actual age was not young. They were Ma Yuxian's 2 junior sisters. One of them was born in the Dou clan of Cloud Tower, while the other was born in the mountains. Midway, she turned into a pure martial artist and joined the army. In the end, during a tragic battle, the imperial advisor, Pei Bei, who was in charge of the battle, saw her talent in martial arts and took her in as a disciple. Her martial arts realm improved rapidly, like a hot knife through butter. Dou Funxia, whose hair was tied up in a spirit snake bun, leaned against a green bamboo lazily. She had a plump body. She squinted her eyes and smiled, sizing up the unfriendly man in green. Chapter 803. Chen Pingan, who carried his sword on his back again, appeared at the bottom of the stairs outside the Confucian temple. Lin Junbai was quite bold. He seemed to have just sobered up. When Lin Junbai saw Chen Pingan walking up the stairs, he immediately got rid of the smell of alcohol on his body. He greeted Chen Pingan and smiled without saying a word. Chen Pingan nodded and praised, "How dare you get drunk at the entrance of the Confucian temple? You're so domineering, Junbai. Don't bring a big basket with you when you go out so that you don't injure others." Lin Junbai was speechless. Chapter 804. The Sage of Rites, the Sage of Rites, and the old elementary scholar returned to the Confucian temple to participate in the meeting. The atmosphere that was gradually relaxing became tense again. The cultivators who wanted to go out for a drink and a chat had to stay behind obediently. The old elementary scholar sat upright and still. After waiting for a long time, he did not hear a single word of congratulations. He scratched his head in confusion. It is said that when a person leaves, the tea cools. Only then can one see the fickleness of human nature. Why is it that when the cold stove reappears, there is no response from this group of people? He didn't feel happy or sad about reinstating his status as a sage of Confucian temple. But that didn't mean they didn't say anything. Bullying Mr. Nice Guy and mocking the honest guy. Old Master Fu saw the old scholar scowling at him, so he explained what had happened at the Confucian temple to him with a smile. The headmasters of the 5 academies Yunshu, Lantai, Hulian, Chunsu, and Tongli had all lost their titles and caused a huge commotion. The youngest headmaster, Chunsu, even dared to question the Sage of Rites, and was sent away by a Liangli. Therefore, everyone was more cautious about what they said. The old elementary scholar exclaimed, "Like father, like son." Quasi-Sage took out a book from the stack of books on the desk. He looked at the position that was just taken by the young hermit officer and felt helpless. Is he just not at home? Chapter 805. Night boat, Consonant City. At dusk, Ning Yarrow planned to go to the next city. She waved her sword again and opened the restriction of the night boat. Her sword light shot into the sky. She wanted to let the Confucian temple in Middle-earth know about the boat's whereabouts. Before leaving, Ning Yarrow brought Pei Qian, Xiaomi, and the white-haired boy to find the female city lord, who was known as the Master of Poetry. Other than thanking Consonant City for their hospitality, she also helped Chen Ping'an's friend, Jiang Shangzhen, pass a message to her. Madame Li and the handsome young man with antlers on his head led several foreign guests to walk on a covered bridge that rose above the sea of clouds. Near the covered bridge, there was a patch of sunset that was like a brocade, like a precious bright red lichen. Everyone climbed up and looked into the distance. The scenery was pleasant, the air of the mountains was beautiful, and the birds flew together. The world was quiet and peaceful. Madame Li suddenly felt unhappy because at the end of the covered bridge, a group of uninvited guests came from Mongrong City. Chapter 806. Seeing Cao Ci, Chen Ping'an cupped his fists and smiled. Thank you for your willingness to teach Pei Qian 4 rounds in Da Duan's capital. Cao Ci nodded with a smile and accepted the young official's thanks. In the early years, Cao Ci had taught Pei Qian 4 rounds in a row. She had put in a lot of effort in teaching Pei Qian. Since this was the truth, there was nothing to hide. Moreover, in the 3rd round of Pei Qian's most imposing, strongest fist intent, and newest moves, Cao Ci had taken 2 punches from her, both on the face. She had to thank Chen Ping'an. No matter how one looked at it, she was still the one who had lost. As for the last round where she had lost 3 rounds in a row, the young female martial artist was a bit stubborn. She threw out a lot of punches that were pieced together and fought like a Jianghu style. In front of him, Cao Ci was dressed in white, spotless. When Chen Ping'an was young and met Cao Ci on the city wall, he only felt that this person of the same age was wearing a snow-white robe and had a handsome appearance, like a celestial being. She was too high to reach. Chapter 807. Each had its own crossing point and its own boat. Fortunately, it was a peaceful encounter with Shekang. 2 blue-robed scholars of different ages stood side by side at the edge of the cliff. The sea and the sky were the same color. No wonder so many people at the foot of the mountain chased after the traces of immortals. Chen Ping'an was a little surprised. He had been invited by the Sage of Rites to attend the meeting at the Confucian temple. When he left, it was the Sage of Rites who sent him all the way to the East Sea of the Central Divine Continent. It seemed like he was waiting for the night boat. Of course, he didn't know that it was his teacher who used the reason of parting on good terms to persuade the Sage of Rites to accompany his last disciple on this trip. Chapter 808. The 3 of them left, leaving behind Chen Ping'an, an outsider of the mountain and sea sect. He sat alone on the edge of the cliff, looking into the distance. Where the cliffs of the human world meet, the mountain light meets the water light. A green-robed man with a sword on his back is a tourist far away. In history, the mountain and sea sect had changed its name, but it had only changed one word, changing the river to the sea. However, the old cultivators of the Central Divine Continent were still used to calling it the mountain and sea sect. It was a pity that he had not met that female ancestral master today. It was said that she was the disciple of sect leader Nailan Xianxiu. Otherwise, he would have had the chance to know which senior brother she liked. Whether she liked Kui Dong, Zhuo Zhuo, or any of the senior brothers, it seemed that she had good taste. Chapter 809. Chen Ping'an disembarked the ship and went ashore. There was still some distance from the skeleton beach ferry. That was good. Chen Ping'an had planned to go to the Muyi mountain where the ancestral hall of the draped hemp sect was located when he returned to the Aquarius continent. As for the mural city, there was no need to go there. Anyway, the opportunity was gone, and the painted pictures had become white paintings. However, Chen Ping'an had to go to the Naihe Guan Bazaar, which was the entrance to the Ghost Palace Valley. Now that the Ghost Palace Valley had lost its backbone because of Gao Cheng's disappearance, Not only was there no leader in Jingguan City, the city lord of White Cage City, Pu Tong, had gone to the battlefield of the Aquarius continent and had disappeared without a trace. There was only a rumor that Pu Tong had followed a monk to travel to the Western Buddhist kingdom. The departure of Jiao Cheng and Pu Tong forced the spirits and ghosts of various cities in Greasy Skin City to hurriedly form a loose alliance, and then reached an agreement with the hemp sect that the two sides would not attack each other for 100 years. Therefore, the current Ghost Palace Valley had completely changed. Although it was still gloomy, it was impossible for foreign cultivators to come here to gain experience, because they had lost the protection of the hemp sect. Moreover, the major ghosts were unusually united. However, if someone really felt that he could run amok in the Ghost Palace Valley and start a massacre, the hemp sect would not stop him. Chen Pinggan carried a knight sword on his back and a red wine pot on his waist. Ning Yarrow wore a golden robe and carried a sword case on his back. Pei Qian carried a bamboo box on his back and a walking stick in his hand. Inside stood a little girl in black. Xiaomi was counting with her fingers, calculating when she would return to her hometown. The Big Mute Lake. Chapter 8:10. If it wasn't for the business he had to discuss, Chen Pinggan would not have gone to the Peach Blossom Crossing to disturb the cultivators of the Sparrow Mansion. Delaying their refining of the robe was delaying the earning of the Luo Po Mountain. The Sparrow Mansion was located in the Water Kingdom's Water Kingdom. The Water Kingdom, including the capital city, was built on islands. The Sparrow Mansion was located at the intersection of a giant lake and a large stream. The stream was called the Peach Blossom Water. White clouds hovered above the Peach Blossom Crossing all year round, surrounding the mountain where the Sparrow Mansion was located. It was like wearing a snow-white crown. The scenery was beautiful. Miu had once cultivated here for many years. It was said that he had incurred a lot of love debts. Could this be considered as ruining the reputation of the Luo Po Mountain? Chen Pinggan silently noted it down. When he returned to the Luo Po Mountain, he would have a good chat with the Great Sword Fairy Mi. At the foot of the mountain, there was a tea house owned by the Sparrow Mansion. In fact, business had always been poor because the price of tea was too expensive. Most cultivators who passed by the Peach Blossom Crossing chose to tour the peach forest. Chapter 8:11. If it wasn't because he had a business to discuss, Chen Pinggan wouldn't have gone to the Peach Blossom Ferry to disturb the cultivators of Rainbow Sparrow Manor. Delaying their crafting of the robe was equivalent to delaying Luo Po Mountain from earning money. Rainbow Sparrow Manor was located within the borders of the Lakewater Nation. Including the capital city, the prefectures and cities were all built on islands. Rainbow Sparrow Manor was located at the intersection of a huge lake and a large stream. The stream was called the Peach Blossom Water. White clouds hovered above the Peach Blossom Ferry all year round, surrounding the green mountain where Rainbow Sparrow Manor was located. It was as if they were wearing a snow-white crown. The mountains and rivers were interdependent, the white clouds lingered, and the peach blossoms were in full bloom. Miu had once cultivated here for many years, and it was said that he had incurred a lot of love debts. Was this considered as ruining the reputation of Luo Po Mountain? Chen Pinggan silently recorded it down. He would have a good chat with Great Sword Immortal Mi when he returned to Luo Po Mountain. At the foot of the mountain, there was a tea house operated by Rainbow Sparrow Manor. Actually, business had always been slow. Because the tea was too expensive, the cultivators who passed by the Peach Blossom Ferry chose to travel through the peach forest. Chapter 8:12. Chen Pinggan took off the blade strengthening gourd and took a sip of wine. He looked at the plaque at the foot of the mountain and said, "The handwriting is not good. It's not even as good as the apricot flowers by the roadside." This sect was called Suoyun. It was located in the north of the central part of the North Continent. It was good at capturing ghosts, refining mountain incense, and painting door gods. The immortal sects in the North Continent were the only ones in the Howran 9 continents where every family would set up an array formation for their respective ancestral hall, and they spared no effort. On B Continent Mountain, The main focus was to maintain a mountain guarding array formation, and more often than not, to set up a symbolic mountain restriction on the ancestral hall. Liu Jinglong asked in his mind, "What's next?" It was the first time Liu Jinglong had done something like asking about the ancestral hall. His original intention was that the two of them didn't need to land at the mountain gate. They could just stop in the air and attack a few times with Chen Pinggan from afar to split the ancestral hall into two. Then they could call it a day and go home. Chapter 8:13. A wandering sword cultivator from the Great Wall of Sword Aura? Wei Jingxuan was doubtful. Didn't they say that the surviving sword cultivators from the Great Wall of Sword Aura followed a city to the fifth world? Kui Gongzhuang, who was a ninth realm martial artist, had already made up his mind to watch from the sidelines. If he made half a punch, he would lose and die. His thinking was much simpler than Wei Jingxuan's. He only cared about one thing. The sword cultivators of the world would not joke about the Great Wall of Sword Aura. Moreover, this person had the current leader of the Taihui sword clan standing beside him. Although the North Continent liked to compete with other Grandmaster halls, in reality, the Q-sword was not a small matter. Especially when two sects had completely fallen out with each other on the mountain. Bystanders should not watch without gambling. Chapter 8:14. The archway of the ferry was known as the underwater cave. The water surface of the Great Desecration Cave was especially vast. It was 300 miles wide. The last time Chen Pinggan came here, he was also wearing a green robe, carrying a sword on his back and a red wine gourd on his waist. However, he was carrying a sword immortal last time. Now, he was carrying a night ranger and was missing a green bamboo mountain staff. The founder of the Water Dragon sect planted more than 1,000 orange trees at the wooden slave ferry. Before he died, he said that his cultivation was mediocre and that he only had 1,000 heads of wooden slaves, which he left to his disciples. For some reason, Chen Pinggan thought of the old ancestor of the Jade Gui sect, Zun Yuan. According to Jiang Shangzhen, Old Man Zun's true last words in this life were actually 3 words that he muttered to himself: "The Yu family is poor." It was as if all the sects on the mountain that had an orderly inheritance and a continuous stream of incense had a leader who was meticulous and calculative. Chen Pinggan said to Ning Yarrow apologetically, "I took a few more days than expected at the Suoyun sect, so I won't accompany you to the Dragon Palace and Duck Island. I need to go straight to the Chongxian Bureau of the Daiyuan dynasty to discuss some matters with Emperor Lu and the imperial tutor, Yang Qing. Then I need to meet Sun Jie and Xiao Jingji of the Water Dragon sect to discuss the lease of Duck Island. You can wait for me at Duck Island. The scenery in the Dragon Palace is very beautiful. It won't be boring to walk around for a few days. I'll try to come back as soon as possible." Chapter 8:15. He heard that the lady before him called herself Ning Yarrow. Even if there were many people with the same name, Li Yuan wasn't stupid. At least in the Great Wall of Sword Aura that Chen Pinggan traveled, there weren't 2 Ning Yarrow. Li Yuan's legs trembled. He quickly grabbed Chen Pinggan's arm. This great blasphemy water lord's ability to mend the pen after the sheep is lost was superb. Because of his guilty conscience, he didn't dare to look at Ning Yarrow. Li Yuan only said something to Chen Pinggan that touched his heart. "Chen Pinggan, brothers are brothers. Truth is truth. You really aren't worthy of Sword Celestial Ning." Was Lady Ning someone that could be called so casually? He had to call her Sword Celestial Ning. As for whether Sword Celestial Ning would appreciate it, Li Yuan didn't know and didn't want to guess. Fortunately, Chen Pinggan was smiling happily and sincerely. He probably felt that there was no problem with Li Yuan's words. Li Yuan was slightly reassured. He carefully turned around and straightened his robe. He bowed and said, "Li Yuan from Jidu pays his respects to Sword Celestial Ning." Chapter 8:16. The trip to the Confucian Temple and the North Continent had been fruitful. Chen Pinggan rolled up his sleeves, exhaled, and rubbed his hands when he was ready to count his belongings. Looking at his posture, He was like a saint overseeing a small world. Ju Meili and the white-haired boy sat next to each other. One of them was sprawled on the table, waiting with wide eyes. The other looked sickly and was busy slapping the table repeatedly. When he boarded the ship, he was punished by the elder of the hidden official. He said that he liked slapping the table, so he slapped it 10,000 times. Otherwise, he could forget about becoming a servant disciple in Luopa Mountain. Chen Pinggan took out 3 items from his sleeves. They were gifts from the 2 lords of the Central Plains to congratulate his master at the meritorious forest. Among them, Mount Joey gave him a pot of calamus, while Zhu Yuxian of Mount Yenji gave him 12 boxes of rouge and face powder. There was also an extremely rare origami swallow in black. The white-haired boy was not interested after a glance. He slapped the table silently with one hand and yawned with the other. When he noticed the elder of the hidden official looking at him, he immediately said, "Treasures. Which one of them isn't the treasure of the mountain?" Chapter 8:17. At the border between Shushui country and Jiuyu country, amidst the green mountains and clear waters, a man and a woman were walking side by side towards a mountain god temple at the top of the mountain. The man carried a sword on his back and wore a jade hairpin on his head. He wore a long green robe and cloth shoes. The woman carried a sword case on her back and wore a snow-white robe. Both the people and the scenery could be painted. The mountain was called Jingling, and the mountain god temple was built about 20 years ago. The temple's rank was not high, and the one who enjoyed the incense was a mountain god that the local people had never heard of. Back then, an assistant minister of the Shushui country's Ministry of Rites held the ceremony. He was a scholar from the county and was busy trying to curry favor with his relatives. Unfortunately, he couldn't find out which Lady Liu Qian was in history even after flipping through the official history books and local county records. There was a famous Huang River nearby. Every rainy season, there would be a scene of the Huang River flowing in spring. The peaceful years after the end of the chaotic era made people cherish it even more. Therefore, a wedding banquet was held at the Huang River King's residence. The wedding of the river god was a grand event that only happened once in 100 years. Therefore, from the local officials to the common people, it was very festive, as if it was the new year. The incense at the Jingling Mountain God Temple was also better than usual. Chapter 8:18. The Milky Way and the Green Peaks were like clusters. In the immortal mansions of the distant Shenyang Mountain, there seemed to be old sword immortals calling their friends and holding private gatherings and banquets. Candlelight was everywhere, illuminating the place like a city of fire. The stars in the sky moved and the wine cups in the mortal world swirled. It was a pleasing sight. The 3rd hour of the night was the time to read and practice the sword. In the immortal and closest to Azure Mist Peak, Chen Pinggan and Liu Xianyang were both lying on rattan chairs, enjoying the cool air. Liu Xianyang had long since fallen asleep, while Chen Pinggan had nothing to do, so he was flipping through a book on calendar. Chen Pinggan closed the book and put it in his sleeve. He said softly, "It's midnight." According to Taoism, there was a mysterious saying of yang fire is emitted at midnight, 216. The cultivators chose this time to cultivate, to refine their bodies, to steam their jindan, to purify their yin and turn their bodies into fine jade. According to the white-haired boy, one of the 10 young candidates, rice thief Wang Dianyuan, was originally a scribe in a small Taoist temple. He accidentally picked up an abandoned Taoist book and cultivated according to this method. He refined Chong He in the mountain river cauldron and nurtured 10,000 mysterious pearls. When he attained Tao, there was an opportunity for the fog to disperse, the sun to shine, the clouds to disperse, and the moon to shine. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories,